Hey there, tonight we're uncovering Christmas during the Crusades, a time when faith and war intertwined amidst the cold sands of the Holy Land. The truth is, despite the battles, echoes of carols somehow found their way through the ancient stone walls. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now find your comfort zone, perhaps turn on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's venture into tonight's story together. Winter crusading might sound as appealing as a snowball fight in a hailstorm, but for medieval knights, it was a high-stakes game of survival wrapped in a thick cloak of religious fervor. Picture hundreds of armored warriors trudging through icy landscapes, their chainmail clinking like an off-key symphony of determination and discomfort. You'd think the biting cold would deter anyone with half a brain from heading to the Holy Land during winter, but the Crusaders were not just anyone. They were fueled by faith, fortune, and frankly, a fair bit of medieval madness. Let's talk logistics, because spoiler alert, the Crusades weren't all gallant battles and holy relics. It was more like a medieval road trip from hell. If you've ever complained about the cost of a plane ticket, consider this. Embarking on a crusade could cost a knight up to 4 times his annual income. To put it in modern terms, that's like deciding to spend 4 years of your salary on a one-way ticket to the Middle East, with no guarantee of a return flight. Knights sold lands, mortgaged their castles, or even took loans from the local moneylender, who, let's face it, was probably the medieval version of a payday loan shark. And as if financial ruin wasn't enough, there was the small matter of actually getting there. The journey from Europe to Jerusalem was no stroll in the park. We're talking about a trek that spanned over 2,000 miles, a daunting distance even by today's standards. It was a logistical nightmare, with supply lines stretched thinner than a monk's patience during Lent. Horses needed feeding, soldiers needed sustenance, and armor required maintenance, all while traversing hostile territories and unpredictable weather. Speaking of weather, winter was the cherry on top of this misery cake. Imagine trying to cross the Alps, not with a ski pass and a thermos of hot cocoa, but with heavy armor and a nagging sense of impending doom. Snowstorms could ambush a crusading party faster than you can say, Deus Vult, turning what was already a grueling march into an endurance test worthy of a medieval Ironman. And if frostbite didn't get you, there were always the friendly neighborhood bandits or the ever-present threat of disease to look forward to. But why winter, you ask? Surely the Crusaders could have waited for spring, when the weather was as pleasant as a troubadour's ballad. The truth is, timing was critical. Leaving in the fall was often a strategic decision. By departing then, the Crusaders aimed to avoid the sweltering summer heat of the Middle East, which could turn chainmail into a personal rotisserie. Plus, the element of surprise was key. Launching an attack during the winter months, when adversaries were least expecting it, was a tactic as old as warfare itself. Now, amidst all this chilly chaos, it's easy to romanticize the Crusaders as valiant paragons of virtue on a noble quest. But let's not forget the less picturesque aspects. The journey was fraught with infighting, desertions, and a morale that was often as low as the winter temperatures. Chronicles from the time, like those of Fulcher of Chartres, paint a picture not of unwavering knights, but of men grappling with the harshness of reality. Fulcher himself noted that many crusaders did not believe they would ever return to their homeland. A grim thought to ponder while huddled around a meager campfire, trying to keep warm. The romantic narratives of the Crusades often gloss over these gritty details, preferring tales of chivalry and divine purpose. But beneath the gilded veneer lies a story of human endurance against the odds, where faith clashed with the brutalities of medieval life. It's a reminder that while the Crusaders were driven by religious zeal, they were also very much at the mercy of the mundane, weather, finances, and the limits of human resilience. As we delve deeper into the story of Christmas during the Crusades, it's essential to remember the duality of their journey. Yes, there were moments of triumph and spiritual fulfillment, but they were hard-won amidst a backdrop of hardship and sacrifice. The Crusades were a cocktail of ambition and adversity, shaken, not stirred, by the chill of a winter campaign. It's a history lesson wrapped in layers of chainmail, offering a glimpse into a past where the cold was both a literal and metaphorical challenge to overcome. But amidst the chill of winter and the clang of steel, what really warmed the hearts of those medieval warriors? Enter, stage left, the alluring mix of political intrigue and religious fervor that fueled the Crusades. You see, the Crusades were not just holy pilgrimages with a side of battlefield brawls. They were a complex web of motivations where politics tangoed with religion and economics played the third wheel. Let's start with the religious motivations. At the heart of it all was the promise of spiritual redemption. Pope Urban Roman II, with his flair for the dramatic, proclaimed that anyone who took up the cross to reclaim the Holy Land would have their sins forgiven. It was the ultimate divine deal, like a celestial Black Friday sale, only instead of discounts, you got a free pass to heaven. This promise was a powerful motivator in a time when the afterlife was front and center in everyone's minds. The medieval world was a place where spiritual stakes were as high as a cathedral's spire. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Behind the pious veneer lurked hard-nosed political ambitions. Leaders like King Richard, the Lionheart, weren't just there to collect spiritual brownie points. The Crusades were a chance to expand influence and territory. Good old Richard, for instance, saw the Crusades as both a noble cause and a strategic chess move. He wasn't just riding into battle with a prayer. He had an eye on the geopolitical board, seeking to solidify his standing among European powers. And then there was money, sweet, tempting, jingling money. The economic incentives of the Crusades were as tantalizing as a medieval feast after a long fast. For those funding these campaigns, the promise of plunder and control over lucrative trade routes was irresistible. The Holy Land wasn't just spiritually significant, it was a commercial gold mine. Cities like Jerusalem were vital hubs in the trade networks connecting East and West. By controlling these areas, Crusaders could tap into the flow of goods that enriched their coffers and filled their treasuries. Now, let's talk about Christmas in the Crusader camp. For the Christian warriors, Christmas was both a morale booster and a reminder of their divine mission. Celebrating the birth of Christ in the very land where he had walked was a poignant moment, one that reinforced their faith and resolve. But it wasn't all hymns and hallelujahs. Accounts from the time reveal that Christmas celebrations were as much about survival as they were about spirituality. There were no festive feasts, supplies were often scarce, and the best you could hope for was a slightly larger ration of dried meat. On the other side of the battlefield, Muslim leaders had their own views of the Crusaders, who they saw as invaders rather than holy pilgrims. For leaders like Saladin, the Crusades were a clash of cultures and a defense of their homeland. Saladin, renowned for his chivalry and strategic genius, saw the conflict as an opportunity to unite the fragmented Muslim territories against a common foe. He was a man of both faith and pragmatism, using the Crusades to consolidate power and promote Islamic unity. The perception of Christmas among Muslims in the region was understandably different. While they respected the Christian holiday as a significant event for their adversaries, it was also a time to bolster defenses and remain vigilant. To them, the Crusades were not just a religious conflict, but a persistent challenge to their sovereignty and way of life. As we peel back the layers of this historical narrative, it's clear that the Crusades were a multifaceted affair. They were driven by a heady mix of religious zeal, political maneuvering, and economic ambition. The romantic tales of knights in shining armor, galloping off to save the Holy Land, are only part of the story. The reality was far more complex, and dare we say human. Each crusader, from the lowly foot soldier to the highest king, had their own reasons for undertaking such a perilous journey. So, as we continue our journey through the icy winds of the Crusades, remember that beneath the frostbitten exterior was a melting pot of motivations. The Crusades were not just battles for holy relics or epic sieges over ancient cities. They were a testament to the tangled web of human desires, faith, power, and fortune, all playing out against the backdrop of a world in flux. And with that, our exploration of Christmas during the Crusades takes another step forward. We've seen the political and religious forces at play, and now we turn our gaze to the unfolding drama of alliances and betrayals, where every decision could tip the scales of this monumental conflict. But that's a story for another day, as the winds of history continue to blow us forward. As we dive into the kaleidoscope of alliances and betrayals that shaped the Crusades, it's clear that this was no medieval cumbear with knights and sultans swapping recipes over a campfire. Instead, it was a high-stakes chess game where every piece moved with a purpose, and the board was an ever-shifting landscape of loyalties and enmities. Let's talk about cultural exchanges, or the lack thereof. The idea that Crusaders and Muslims sat down for a cozy Christmas dinner, swapping gifts and goodwill, is about as plausible as finding a snowstorm in the Sahara. While there were moments of mutual respect and admiration, they were often overshadowed by the clatter of swords and the stench of mistrust. Take the infamous 1192 Christmas truce during the Third Crusade, for instance. Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, two titans of their time, agreed to a ceasefire, allowing pilgrims access to Jerusalem. A heartwarming tale of peace and understanding. Not quite. It was more a strategic pause, a breather in the relentless rhythm of war, rather than a prelude to lasting harmony. Now, just because they weren't exchanging fruitcakes doesn't mean there wasn't cultural exchange. The Crusaders, who might have started with the culinary skills of a boiled potato, soon developed a taste for the exotic spices of the East. Saffron, cinnamon, and cumin became the medieval equivalent of a power lunch, elevating the bland European palate to something resembling a flavor profile. And let's not forget the architectural influences. Gothic arches and fortress designs absorbed elements from Islamic architecture, proving that while they might have been at each other's throats, they were also peeking over each other's shoulders for inspiration. Of course, embracing new spices didn't translate to embracing new cultures wholesale. The Crusaders often saw themselves as the saviors of a land rightfully theirs, fueled by a heady mix of divine right and sheer audacity. This was no melting pot. It was more a pressure cooker, with tensions simmering just below the surface. The notion of harmonious mingling was often just a veneer, masking a reality where cultural interactions were fraught with suspicion, and more often than not, outright hostility. One such myth ripe for debunking is the idea that Crusaders and Muslims engaged in frequent and friendly cultural exchanges, like a medieval version of a language exchange program. Yes, there were instances where individuals learned from one another, but these were exceptions, not the rule. The primary source accounts reveal a more complex picture. Chronicler William of Tyre, for instance, provides glimpses into the occasional curiosity and respect that existed, but these were often overshadowed by the prevailing winds of war. Economic exchanges, however, were an undeniable reality. The Crusaders, in their quest for the Holy Land, inadvertently opened the floodgates of trade between East and West. Venetian merchants, those shrewd maestros of maritime commerce, saw the Crusades as a golden opportunity to expand their trading empire. They supplied ships, provisions, and even fought alongside Crusaders, all for a slice of the economic pie. Meanwhile, the Muslim merchants of the Levant capitalized on the demand for Eastern goods, trading everything from silk to steel. It was a symbiotic relationship born not of friendship, but of necessity and mutual benefit. The economic impact was profound. The Crusades accelerated the flow of goods and ideas across continents, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance's intellectual and cultural blossoming. Yet this was no altruistic endeavor. The Crusaders' interest in Eastern goods was driven by the same motivations fueling their military campaigns: profit and prestige. The irony is palpable. While they fought to reclaim the Holy Land, they were simultaneously enriching themselves with the very cultures they sought to conquer. And what about the Crusaders themselves? These were not monolithic entities, but rather a ragtag collection of individuals with varying motivations. Some were devout pilgrims seeking redemption, others were second sons looking for land and a legacy, and a few were simply in it for the pillage and plunder. This diversity of intentions often led to friction, with alliances as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. The infamous Fourth Crusade, which saw Crusaders sacking Constantinople, a Christian city, rather than liberating Jerusalem, is a testament to the tangled web of allegiances and ambitions that defined these campaigns. On the flip side, the Muslim world was no stranger to internal divisions. Saladin, while celebrated as a unifying figure, spent as much time consolidating power among warring factions as he did fighting Crusaders. His ability to unite disparate Muslim territories against a common enemy was a remarkable feat of diplomacy and strategy. Yet, it was a fragile unity, constantly threatened by rivalries and regional ambitions. So, where does this leave us in our exploration of Christmas during the Crusades? We find ourselves in a tapestry of human endeavor, where faith, power, and fortune interwove in ways both beautiful and brutal. Christmas, for the Crusaders, was not just a religious observance, but a reminder of their mission, a mission that was as much about earthly gains as it was about heavenly rewards. Meanwhile, for the Muslim defenders, it was a time to strengthen resolve, to stand firm against what they saw as foreign aggression. As we pull back the curtain on this period, we're left with a nuanced view of history that defies simple narratives. The Crusades were a crucible of cultures, clashing and coalescing in unexpected ways. As we prepare to delve deeper into this saga, it's crucial to remember that behind the myths and legends were real people, driven by complex motivations, navigating a world as unpredictable as the winter battlefield they found themselves on. Stay tuned as the plot thickens and we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of the Crusades. The next chapter will delve into the personal stories and the unyielding spirit that defined this era of tumult and transformation. So, hold onto your helmets. The journey is far from over. And so, our wintry trek through the crusading Christmas continues, marching alongside medieval warriors whose daily survival tactics were as much about grit as they were about grace. Now, if you're picturing a knight's life during the holiday season as some sort of Yuletide feast with knights clinking goblets and singing carols, it's time for a reality check, because the Crusades were less jingle bells and more silent night, minus the peace and quiet. Let's start with food, or rather the lack thereof. Forget about turkey dinners or plum pudding. The Crusaders' menu was more Iron Age than Iron Chef. The staples, dried meat, hardtack, and a side of please, let this not be our last meal. Supplies were scarcer than a parking spot on Black Friday, and what they had was rationed with the generosity of a miser. An army marches on its stomach, sure, but this army was often limping along on little more than crumbs and faith. Consider the logistics. Feeding thousands of men required a supply chain that stretched across continents. Grain, the lifeline of any medieval army, was costly and cumbersome. Picture this. A single knight might consume around 2 pounds of grain per day. Multiply that by thousands, and you've got a logistical nightmare that made modern supply chain issues look like a stroll in the park. The cost of transporting these supplies was astronomical. Up to half the total expense of the crusade itself could go to feeding and provisioning the troops. And let's be real, a knight with an empty stomach was as useful as a sword without a blade. Now, shelter. If you think the Crusaders were nestled in cozy tents with the medieval equivalent of a space heater, think again. Their accommodations were more open-plan concept than luxury lodgings. Many nights were spent under the stars, or rather, the rain clouds, huddled in makeshift camps. In the biting cold of a Middle Eastern winter, warmth was a distant dream. Wood for fires was scarce, and stones, while abundant, weren't exactly known for their insulating properties. Even when they did find shelter, it was often in the form of hastily constructed forts or commandeered buildings, which offered as much protection from the elements as a sieve does from water. And yet, despite the scarcity and discomfort, there were moments of respite, a fleeting ceasefire amidst the chaos. Enter the truce, the Crusaders' version of a Christmas miracle. These were rare, but not unheard of. Take the truce of 1192, when Richard the Lionheart and Saladin called a temporary halt to hostilities. It wasn't a grand gesture of goodwill, but rather a pragmatic pause, a chance for both sides to catch their breath, restock, and regroup. It was a brief moment where survival instincts overrode battle cries, a reminder that even the fiercest of foes could find common ground when necessity demanded it. But let's debunk the myth of the merry crusader. Romantic tales might have you believe that knights found time to exchange gifts and tales of valor around the campfire. In reality, the mood was more humbug than joy to the world. The scarcity of resources made any semblance of holiday cheer as elusive as a snowflake in the desert. Knights were more focused on keeping their limbs from freezing off than on spreading seasonal cheer. And who could blame them? When your daily bread is tough enough to knock out a tooth, caroling is the last thing on your mind. The economic context paints an even bleaker picture. The cost of maintaining a crusading army was staggering. Financing such an expedition was akin to burning money, or at least burying it in the sand. Every day on campaign drained the coffers of the knights and the nobles who backed them. The price of armor, horses, and provisions was enough to make even the wealthiest baron reconsider his priorities. For many crusaders, the financial burden was a cross heavier than any they had borne before. Loans were common, and debts were as much a part of the crusader's kit as his sword and shield. Yet, amidst this backdrop of scarcity and financial strain, the indomitable spirit of the crusaders shone through. These were men driven by a cause greater than themselves, or so they believed. The notion of reclaiming the Holy Land was a powerful motivator, a beacon that cut through the darkest of nights. But let's not get too romantic here. The Crusades were a complex tapestry of human motivations, where personal ambition often danced with piety in a curious waltz. For some, the promise of spiritual redemption was as enticing as the prospect of new lands and titles. And so, the Crusaders trudged on, each step a testament to their resolve and their resilience. As they huddled around their meager fires, they shared not just the warmth, but a sense of camaraderie forged in the crucible of hardship. Their story is one of human endurance, where the harsh realities of medieval life were met with a steadfast determination to see the journey through to its end, whatever that might be. In the grand tale of the Crusades, the Christmas season was a microcosm of the challenges these warriors faced. It was a time when the harshness of their reality became impossible to ignore, a season that tested their faith and their fortitude in equal measure. As we continue to explore this fascinating chapter of history, we'll uncover more about the personal stories and the unyielding spirit that defined this era of tumult and transformation. So, as we pause in our narrative, remember that the Crusades were a tapestry woven with threads of struggle and survival. It was a time when the fight for the Holy Land was overshadowed by the fight for mere existence, a stark reminder that even the most ardent of warriors were, at their core, only human. And as we prepare to delve deeper into this saga, keep in mind that the journey is far from over. The winds of history have much more to reveal, and the story of Christmas during the Crusades is just getting started. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the intricate tapestry of the Crusades, where every thread tells a tale of courage, conviction, and the unyielding human spirit. So, as we tread the final chapters of our wintry tale through the Crusades, let's turn our focus on the ripples these medieval escapades left on the sands of time, specifically, how they entwined themselves with Christmas traditions in the Holy Land. It's a legacy that's as layered as a medieval fruitcake, filled with surprises and a few questionable nuts. The Crusaders, in their relentless quest, ended up leaving more than just footprints and fallen banners. Their long-term impact on Christmas traditions in the Holy Land is a testament to how these war-torn pilgrimages twisted into something more enduring. You see, during the Crusades, the notion of Christmas took on a dual identity. On one hand, it was a spiritual beacon, lighting the path for those who believed they were on a divine mission. On the other, it was a pragmatic pause button, a chance for war-weary soldiers to recharge, however meagerly, amidst the chaos. Fast forward to present-day Christmas in the Holy Land, and you'll find that the Crusades' influence is still lurking around like an uninvited guest at a medieval banquet. For starters, the tradition of pilgrimage, amplified by those ancient crusaders, continues to draw throngs of the faithful to Bethlehem each year. It's an echo of those original pilgrimages, albeit with fewer swords and more smartphones. Now, let's spill some ink on how the Crusades reshaped the economic landscape, which, in turn, had a subtle yet significant impact on Christmas celebrations. The Crusades opened trade routes like a can opener on a tin of medieval ambition. The influx of Eastern goods, spices, textiles, and exotic curios spurred a shift in European markets. The Venetians, those savvy maritime merchants, turned the flow of Eastern luxuries into a tidal wave of economic prosperity. This exchange of goods wasn't just about enriching coffers, it also enriched cultures. The introduction of new spices and fabrics influenced European customs, and by extension, Christmas traditions. Imagine a medieval Christmas feast before the Crusades, bland, heavy, and as exciting as a monastery's cookbook. Post-Crusades, however, and there's a dash of cinnamon here, a hint of ginger there. These spices, once rare and costly, became symbols of wealth and celebration, elevating the Christmas table from mere sustenance to a sensory experience. Let's not forget the architectural imprints left by these holy wars. The Gothic cathedrals that dart the European landscape owe a debt to the architectural styles observed and absorbed during the Crusades. The pointed arches and vaulted ceilings that define these structures were influenced by Islamic architecture, observed by crusaders who, when not busy wielding swords, were often peering over ramparts in sheer architectural admiration. These grand edifices became the backdrop for many a Christmas service, echoing hymns off their lofty ceilings. But here's the kicker. Despite their lasting impact, the Crusades themselves didn't turn the Holy Land into an eternal Christmas wonderland. The romantic notion of snow-dusted nights and harmonious holidays is more myth than fact. The realities were far grittier. These campaigns, while forging new paths and connections, also left a trail of destruction and disarray that took centuries to heal. The stories of noble knights and saintly deeds often gloss over the grim realities of war. The Crusaders didn't always return home as conquering heroes. Many returned to empty coffers and lands ravaged by absentee landlords. Those who stayed in the Holy Land faced a constant struggle to maintain their foothold, amidst a backdrop of ever-shifting alliances and hostilities. Moreover, for the local populations in the Holy Land, the Crusades were less about Christmas cheer and more about survival in the face of foreign incursions. The legacy of the Crusades is a complex tapestry of cultural exchange and conflict, with Christmas traditions evolving as a small yet enduring thread within it. Yet, amidst the rubble of the past, there are stories of resilience and adaptation. The Crusades, despite their tumultuous nature, contributed to a broader exchange of ideas, faiths, and traditions. Christmas in the Holy Land today is a blend of these historical influences, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who lived through those times. In the grand scheme of history, the Crusades were a stark reminder of the duality of human endeavor, where the pursuit of divine ideals often collided with the harsh realities of earthly existence. They were a crucible where faith, power, and ambition melted together, forging a legacy that continues to shape our world today. And as we close the chapter on this frosty tale of Christmas during the Crusades, let's remember that history is never just a series of events. It's a living narrative, ever-changing, ever-influencing, and always ready to surprise us. So, as you drift off to sleep with visions of medieval knights dancing in your head, know that the story of the Crusades and their impact on Christmas is as complex as any epic saga. It's a tale of contrasts, where the warmth of faith stood against the chill of adversity. And perhaps, just perhaps, it's a reminder that even in the darkest of winters, there's a light of hope that lingers on, undiminished by time or circumstance. Nanjing in 1937, folks, was like the teenager who thinks they're invincible right before high school graduation, unaware that life is about to hit them like a freight train. Nestled in the Yangtze River Delta, this city had a population of over 1 million, and it was as bustling as you'd expect. The streets were alive with merchants selling everything from silk to spices, while rickshaws zipped through the chaos like mosquitoes at a summer picnic. But just beneath the surface, storm clouds were gathering, and I'm not talking about the monsoon. The political climate was harder than a jalapeno in July. On one side, you had China, led by Chiang Kai-shek and his Nationalist Party. They were desperately trying to modernize a nation that was, let's face it, still shaking off its imperial cobwebs. On the other side, Japan was flexing its military muscles like a gym bro who just discovered protein shakes. They had already occupied Manchuria in 1931, renaming it Manchukuo, a puppet state that was about as independent as a marionette. The root of all this tension? Resources, of course. Japan was an island nation with more ambition than natural oil reserves, and China's vast lands and resources looked like a buffet to a starving man. By the time the Second Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937, these two countries were already throwing shade like it was an Olympic sport. The Marco Polo Bridge incident in July 1937, a skirmish that escalated faster than a Twitter feud, was the spark that lit this particular powder keg. Now, let's talk key figures. On the Chinese side, you've got Chiang Kai-shek, who was essentially the Steve Jobs of Chinese nationalism, minus the turtlenecks and tech gadgets. Chiang was all about unification and modernization, but his forces were ill-prepared and spread thin. Meanwhile, on the Japanese side, there was Emperor Hirohito, who, let's be honest, was more of a figurehead than a hands-on ruler. The real power lay with the military leaders, like General Iwane Matsui, who saw the conquest of China as not just a military necessity, but a matter of national pride. The thing is, both nations were steeped in their own brand of denial. China was clinging to the hope that international powers like the U.S. or the League of Nations would swoop in and save the day. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Japan, on the other hand, was convinced they could steamroll through China with minimal resistance. What they didn't account for was the fierce, albeit chaotic, resistance from Chinese forces. As Nanjing braced itself for the inevitable, the city was caught in a cocktail of fear, ambition, and a touch of reckless optimism. Residents thought their ancient walls, which had stood for centuries, would protect them. It's the kind of joyful ignorance that you'd find in a disaster movie right before the media hits. And so, the stage was set. Nanjing, a city rich in history and culture, was about to become the backdrop for one of the darkest chapters in human history. As the Japanese forces advanced, the people of Nanjing were left with a choice: flee, fight, or pray for a miracle. Unfortunately, history would show that miracles were in short supply. But before we dive into the chaos that followed, let's debunk a few myths. The romantic notion that the world was watching and would somehow intervene. Pure fantasy. The League of Nations, formed to prevent such conflicts, was about as effective as a chocolate teapot. And the idea that Japan was just a nation of samurai and cherry blossoms, marching off to war with a code of honor, that too was a carefully crafted narrative, one that conveniently glossed over the brutal realities of imperial ambition. In reality, the Second Sino-Japanese War was a clash of two nations caught in a web of historical grievances, economic desperation, and unchecked nationalism. It was a conflict born out of necessity, fueled by fear, and ultimately sustained by a stubborn refusal to blink first. As for Nanjing, it was the unfortunate victim caught in the crossfire, a city that would soon learn the true cost of war, both in terms of human life and historical legacy. So, there you have it. The stage is set, the players are in position, and the curtain is about to rise on a tragedy of epic proportions. Keep your eyes peeled and your wits about you, because the story of the Nanjing Massacre is one that will challenge your understanding of humanity itself. We're just getting started. As the curtain rises on the siege of Nanjing, imagine a scene not unlike a high-stakes chess game, but with far more collateral damage and none of the civility. The Japanese forces, led by General Iwane Matsui, were playing a strategy game that was as much about psychological warfare as it was about military might. They came at Nanjing with a force of over 50,000 troops, equipped with artillery, tanks, and, of course, an unyielding sense of superiority. Think of it like a bulldozer headed for a picket fence. Now, let's talk tactics. The Japanese military wasn't exactly channeling Sun Tzu's art of war with its focus on deception and cunning. Nope, they went with the brute force approach. Break the enemy's spirit, and the body will follow. They had already steamrolled through Shanghai with a ferocity that left the Chinese forces reeling. By the time they set their sights on Nanjing in December 1937, the writing was on the wall, figuratively and soon to be literally, thanks to incoming artillery shells. Meanwhile, the Chinese defenders were scrambling to patch together a defense that was more patchwork quilt than ironclad shield. General Tang Shengjai, tasked with defending the city, had about 100,000 troops at his disposal. But let's be real. These were mostly conscripts, the kind of soldiers who'd likely never seen a battlefield until they were thrust into this meat grinder. It's like trying to stop a tidal wave with a sandcastle. The defense strategy was simple: hold the line at all costs. But when your line is older than Grandma's porcelain teacups and about as robust, well, you can guess how that turned out. The ancient walls of Nanjing, once thought to be impenetrable, were about to get a harsh reality check. In fact, they were more symbolic than strategic, like using a medieval moat to stop a tank. On December 9, the Japanese issued an ultimatum: surrender or face annihilation. General Tang responded with the wartime equivalent of a stiff upper lip, refusing to capitulate. And so, the siege began in earnest on December 10. It was a brutal, coordinated assault that combined air raids, artillery barrages, and ground troop advances. The city was turned into a battlefield, with civilian homes doubling as makeshift fortresses. By December 12, the situation was dire. The defense was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. General Tang, realizing that further resistance was futile, ordered a retreat. But here's the kicker. He didn't exactly tell his troops. Picture a captain abandoning ship without informing the crew, and you get a sense of the chaos that ensued. Japanese forces marched into Nanjing on December 13, 1937, and what followed was a 6-week orgy of violence that defies comprehension. The numbers are staggering. Estimates suggest that up to 300,000 Chinese civilians and disarmed soldiers were killed. That's like wiping out the entire population of a medium-sized city today. The atrocities committed were so heinous that they make even seasoned historians pause. Rape, looting, and wholesale slaughter became the order of the day. It's tempting to cloak these horrors in the romantic notion of the fog of war, but let's not kid ourselves. This was not some grandiose battle of noble warriors. It was a massacre that laid bare the ugliest sides of human nature. The Japanese troops, fueled by a toxic mix of indoctrination and dehumanization, ran amok. The military code of Bushido, with its emphasis on honor and discipline, was conspicuously absent, like a teacher on the last day of school. In the midst of this chaos, a few brave souls emerged as unlikely heroes. People like John Rabe, a German businessman and Nazi Party member who helped establish the Nanjing safety zone. This area, roughly the size of Central Park, became a refuge for tens of thousands of Chinese civilians. Rabe and other foreign nationals, armed with little more than their diplomatic status and a lot of gumption, did their best to shield the vulnerable. While they couldn't stop the slaughter, they did manage to save thousands, an act of humanity in a sea of inhumanity. As we peel back the layers of this grim chapter, it's crucial to dispel the myth that the international community was blissfully unaware. Reports of the massacre reached the outside world, thanks to journalists and missionaries who risked their lives to bear witness. But geopolitical realities, like the appeasement policies of Western powers and the looming threat of World War II, meant that decisive action was elusive. So, as the dust settled over Nanjing, the city was left to pick up the pieces, both literally and metaphorically. The massacre left scars that would linger for generations, shaping Chinese national identity and fueling a deep-seated resentment towards Japan. The world may have turned a blind eye at the time, but history has a way of shining a light on even the darkest corners. In the end, the siege of Nanjing wasn't just a military defeat. It was a human tragedy of monumental proportions. It reminds us that war, with all its strategic posturing and grand narratives, is ultimately about people, broken, battered, and sometimes lost forever. As we continue this journey through history, let's not forget the lessons of Nanjing, that behind every statistic is a story, and behind every story is a reminder of our shared humanity, however flawed. So, buckle up for the next chapter, where we'll dive into the aftermath of this brutal siege and the long road to reckoning. The story of Nanjing is far from over, and there are still many truths to uncover and myths to dismantle. As always, keep your curiosity piqued and your skepticism sharp, because history, like life, is rarely as simple as it seems. As we peel back the layers of this grim chapter, it's crucial to dispel the myth that the international community was blissfully unaware. Reports of the massacre reached the outside world, thanks to journalists and missionaries who risked their lives to bear witness. But geopolitical realities, like the appeasement policies of Western powers and the looming threat of World War II, meant that decisive action was elusive. And now, let's take a deep breath and dive headfirst into the murky waters of human behavior during the Nanjing massacre. If you're wondering how ordinary soldiers turned into perpetrators of unspeakable violence, you're not alone. Historians have been scratching their heads over this one for decades. While it's easy to paint these soldiers as monsters, the truth is more nuanced and unsettling. The Japanese military machine was a well-oiled behemoth of indoctrination. Imagine being fed a steady diet of propaganda that dehumanizes your enemy, turning them into faceless others who are fair game for the worst humanity has to offer. It's the psychological equivalent of giving a toddler a sledgehammer and telling them to go wild in a china shop. The numbers are staggering. Over the course of roughly 6 weeks, up to 300,000 people were killed. That's like the entire population of Pittsburgh being wiped off the map, and the brutality wasn't limited to just murder. Rape was rampant, with estimates suggesting that tens of thousands of women were assaulted. These aren't just numbers, they're a grim tally of human suffering. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes that read like a horror film script, except this was no work of fiction. And why was the world so muted in its response? Let's just say that the international community had its own problems to deal with. The League of Nations was about as effective as an umbrella in a hurricane. The Western powers were busy playing a game of geopolitical chess, trying to keep Hitler in check while turning a blind eye to the atrocities in Asia. It was a classic case of not my circus, not my monkeys, except the circus was a human catastrophe and the monkeys were actually people in desperate need of help. Meanwhile, back in the trenches of Nanjing, the psychological toll on both the victims and the perpetrators was immense. For the Chinese civilians, the massacre was a living nightmare, a relentless assault on their dignity and humanity. Survivors were left to pick up the pieces, haunted by memories that would linger for generations. And for the soldiers, many were consumed by an unholy mix of shame and denial, their actions swept under the rug by a military that preferred to focus on its next conquest. But let's not forget about those who stood up against the tide of violence. There were foreign nationals, like John Rabe and his ragtag band of diplomats and missionaries who risked their necks to save lives. It's a stark reminder that even in the darkest times, there are flickers of light. These individuals operated the Nanjing safety zone, which sheltered around 250,000 civilians, a small miracle amid the chaos. As we wade through this dark chapter, it's worth asking why such atrocities happen in the first place. Is it a failure of leadership, a breakdown of societal norms, or simply the darkest parts of human nature unleashed in a time of war? The answer, as frustrating as it may be, is all of the above. War has a way of stripping away the veneer of civilization, exposing the raw, primal instincts that lie beneath, a fact as old as time and as relevant today as it was in 1937. And while the world may have turned a blind eye to Nanjing, history has a way of demanding that we confront these uncomfortable truths. The events of those 6 weeks are not just a footnote in the annals of history. They are a stark reminder of what happens when humanity loses its way. As we continue this journey through the past, let's keep asking the hard questions, challenging the romantic notions of war, and facing the reality of what happens when nations go down the dark path of dehumanization and destruction. So, what's next on this historical roller coaster? We're gearing up to explore the long road to reckoning and why justice, when it finally arrives, often feels like too little, too late. But for now, let's sit with these stories of horror and heroism, these statistics that speak volumes, and the human capacity for both destruction and redemption. The story of Nanjing is far from over, and there are still many truths to uncover and myths to dismantle. As always, keep your curiosity piqued and your skepticism sharp, because history, like life, is rarely as simple as it seems. As the dust settled over the smoldering ruins of Nanjing, the city was left to grapple with the immediate aftermath of a nightmare that would haunt its streets for years to come. Imagine waking up from a bad dream only to find that reality is far worse. The once bustling metropolis was now a ghost town, its population decimated and its infrastructure in tatters. The survivors faced a grim reality: rebuild from the ashes or be swallowed by them. Here's where the plot thickens. While Nanjing tried to pick up the pieces, the international community was doing the diplomatic equivalent of a cha-cha. They moved forward a step, then back two. Sure, they had heard the whispers of massacres and atrocities, but with World War II looming, they had bigger fish to fry. It was like trying to convince someone to fix a leaky faucet when their house is on fire. The League of Nations, the supposed peacekeepers of the world, were about as useful as a chocolate fire guard. Their response to the Nanjing massacre was tepid at best, a polite nod, and a "we'll get back to you," while they focused on Europe's brewing storm. This wasn't a case of ignorance being bliss. It was a calculated decision to prioritize European stability over Asian suffering. Economically, China was in dire straits. The war had gutted its industrial capacity, and the Nanjing massacre only compounded the problem. The city's economy, once vibrant with trade and commerce, was reduced to a shadow of its former self. Factories were destroyed, businesses looted, and the human capital, those who could rebuild, was either dead or traumatized beyond function. It was like trying to run a marathon with a sprained ankle and a blindfold. For the Chinese government, the massacre became a rallying cry, a bitter reminder of the price of war and a catalyst for national unity. But let's not kid ourselves. Unity is hard to muster when you're spread thinner than a hipster's avocado toast. The nationalist government, already stretched by the ongoing war with Japan, found itself in a precarious position. They needed to rebuild, but with what resources? It was a classic case of robbing Peter to pay Paul, except Peter and Paul were both broke. And then there's the long shadow of trauma. The psychological scars left by the massacre were deep and enduring. Survivors carried the horrors of those 6 weeks with them, their stories passed down through generations. Families were torn apart, communities shattered. In a society where the collective memory runs deep, the Nanjing massacre became a wound that refused to heal, a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty. But let's shift our gaze to the post-war period, where the quest for justice, or at least something resembling it, began to take shape. The Tokyo trials, held in 1946, aimed to bring those responsible for war crimes to justice. It was like a courtroom drama, only without the dramatic reveals and last-minute confessions. Of the 28 defendants, some were convicted, including General Matsui, who was hanged for his role in the massacre. But many others escaped the gallows, their crimes swept under the rug of post-war politics. The trials were a mixed bag. On one hand, they marked a rare moment of accountability. On the other, they were limited in scope and reach, more about setting a precedent than delivering comprehensive justice. The Allies, eager to rebuild Japan as a bulwark against communism, were willing to overlook certain inconvenient truths. It was a pragmatic decision, but one that left many victims feeling shortchanged. Now, about those myths of post-war reconciliation. Let's just say they were as real as unicorns. The notion that Japan and China sat down, hashed out their differences, and sang Kumbaya is a fantasy. In reality, the wounds left by the Nanjing massacre festered, becoming a sticking point in Sino-Japanese relations for decades. It was the elephant in the room that no amount of diplomatic small talk could ignore. Japan, for its part, has had a complicated relationship with its wartime past. While some leaders have issued apologies, others have downplayed the severity of the atrocities or denied them altogether. This selective amnesia hasn't exactly endeared Japan to its neighbors. It's like trying to build a friendship on a foundation of forgotten birthdays and missed apologies, awkward and ultimately unsustainable. For China, the Nanjing massacre became a symbol of national resilience and victimhood. It was a narrative that both united the country and reinforced its grievances against Japan. The memories of the massacre were woven into the fabric of Chinese identity, a constant reminder of the need to remain vigilant against foreign aggression. As we dig into these uncomfortable truths, it's clear that the ghosts of Nanjing still linger. The massacre isn't just a chapter in a history book, it's a living, breathing part of the present. The past, as they say, isn't even past. The tensions between China and Japan, often simmering just below the surface, be traced back to the unresolved trauma of those dark weeks in 1937. So, as we wrap up this segment, remember that the story of Nanjing is far from finished. The quest for justice, reconciliation, and closure continues, a testament to the enduring impact of history on our modern world. As we move forward, let's keep questioning the narratives we've been told, challenging the myths that persist, and seeking the truths that lie beneath the surface. History may be written by the victors, but it's lived by the survivors, and their stories, however painful, deserve to be heard. Now that we've taken our historical detour through the aftermath of the Nanjing massacre, let's steer our time machine into the present and take stock of how this dark chapter casts its long shadow over contemporary times. You might be wondering how an event from 1937 still resonates today. Well, let's just say that the past has a way of sticking around like a stubborn stain on the fabric of international relations. First, let's talk about the legacy of the massacre in historical memory. In China, Nanjing is not just an event to be remembered, it's practically a cornerstone of national identity. The Nanjing Massacre Memorial Hall, opened in 1985, attracts over 1 million visitors annually. It's not just a solemn reminder of the horrors that transpired, but also a tool for education and a stark warning. Never forget. It's like China's way of saying, we remember, and you should too, with the subtlety of a neon sign. Over in Japan, the relationship with this historical event is a bit more, shall we say, selective. While some Japanese leaders have issued apologies over the years, the responses have been mixed. In 1995, then Prime Minister Tomiichi Murayama expressed a heartfelt apology. Yet others have downplayed the severity or even denied the massacre altogether. It's a bit like trying to dance around a landmine. It rarely ends well. This uneven acknowledgement has strained Sino-Japanese relations for decades, making diplomatic summits as tense as a high-stakes poker game. But let's dig into the economic and political context that keeps these tensions simmering. The massacre isn't just a historical footnote. It's an active ingredient in the complicated stew of modern geopolitics. China, now an economic powerhouse, uses the memory of Nanjing as both a cautionary tale and a political lever. It's a card they can play in the game of international relations, an ever-present reminder of past grievances that demands acknowledgement and, ideally, reparations. Japan, meanwhile, has walked a diplomatic tightrope, balancing its post-war pacifism with the need for economic partnerships. The massacre is a sensitive subject that Japan often sidesteps in favor of focusing on mutually beneficial economic ties. But let's be honest, it's like trying to ignore the elephant in the room while negotiating over the price of peanuts. And don't even get me started on the cultural representations. The Nanjing Massacre has been immortalized in literature, film, and art, each medium offering its own interpretation of events. Iris Chang's 1997 book, The Rape of Nanking, brought the massacre to Western audiences, stirring a pot that had long been simmering. Documentaries and films like Lu Chuan's City of Life and Death paint vivid, often brutal portraits that keep the conversation alive and kicking, or perhaps more aptly, screaming. Public discourse around the massacre is like a minefield of opinions, each more volatile than the last. In China, it's often framed as a narrative of victimhood and resilience, a rallying cry for national unity. In Japan, discussions are more cautious, sometimes tiptoeing around the subject like it's an awkward family secret. Internationally, scholars and activists push for recognition and education, arguing that understanding the past is crucial for preventing future atrocities. It's a bit like trying to teach history without the rose-tinted glasses, challenging but necessary. So why does all this matter today? Because the Nanjing Massacre is more than just a historical event. It's a litmus test for how nations deal with the past. It's a stark reminder that history, when ignored or whitewashed, has a nasty habit of repeating itself. In a world where nationalism is on the rise and geopolitical tensions are as fraught as ever, the lessons of Nanjing are as relevant today as they were over 80 years ago. As we wrap up this historical deep dive, let's step back and take a moment to reflect on the broader implications. The Nanjing Massacre serves as a grim testament to the capacity for human cruelty, but also to the resilience of the human spirit. It's a story of horror and heroism, of darkness and light, reminding us that history is rarely black and white, but a complex tapestry of human experience. And here's the kicker. The story of Nanjing, with its echoes of anguish and resilience, compels us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own societies. It challenges us to question the narratives we've been fed and to seek out the stories that have been silenced. Because at the end of the day, history isn't just about the victors or the vanquished. It's about all of us, living with the consequences of what came before. So, as you drift off into the realm of dreams, let this be your takeaway. The past is never truly past, and the lessons it holds are as vital today as they were then. In the face of horror, may we find humanity. In the shadow of silence, may we find our voice. And in the pages of history, may we find the courage to change the future. France in the late 1780 was a bit like a lavish party spiraling out of control, where the cupbearer, King Louis Roman XVI, was too busy sampling the wine to notice the floor collapsing beneath him. While Louis was preoccupied with his locksmithing hobby and Marie Antoinette was rumored to be indulging in a fashionista's dream closet, the rest of France was wringing its collective hands over the national debt. Now, when I say national debt, think of a number so large it could make your head spin faster than a guillotine blade. 12 billion livres. That's billion with a B, folks. It's safe to say that France wasn't just living beyond its means. It was throwing a Gatsby-like rager while the bailiffs were pounding at the door. The royal duo, Louis Roman XVI and his infamous queen, Marie Antoinette, have been the subject of much gossip, both in their time and in ours. The king, despite being amiable, was about as decisive as a cat choosing a place to nap, while Marie Antoinette gets a bad rap for allegedly uttering, "Let them eat cake," when told the peasants had no bread. Spoiler alert, she probably never said it. This juicy tidbit was more likely cooked up by revolutionary propagandists eager to paint her as out of touch. But let's be fair, Marie was no stranger to extravagance. Her penchant for luxury was well documented, from her towering hairstyles to her penchant for gambling. It's like she was playing high-stakes poker with France's future. Meanwhile, the ordinary citizens of France, known collectively as the Third Estate, were not just the background characters in this historical drama. They were the entire stage. Consisting of everyone who wasn't clergy or nobility, this group made up a whopping 98% of the population. That's right, nearly all of France was crammed into this one estate like sardines in a tin. Yet despite their numbers, they were given about as much say in government matters as a mime at a rock concert. And let's not forget the bread. Bread was to the French what Wi-Fi is to us today, absolutely essential. But by 1789, a loaf could cost a week's wages. Imagine that. It was a recipe for disaster, with the bread basket of Europe suddenly feeling like a gluten-free nightmare. The conditions were ripe for revolution, and the Third Estate was brewing with discontent, much like a cup of strong French coffee left on the burner too long. The French economy was a mess, and not the cute kind, like a dog's playful romp through a flower bed. We're talking a full-blown disaster with rampant unemployment, failing harvests, and food shortages. Add to this mix the Enlightenment ideals floating around, ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and the pot was about to boil over. But let's pause for a moment to appreciate the irony of the situation. France, the nation known for its culinary prowess and artistic flair, couldn't keep its people fed or happy. The king, who could have used a crash course in effective leadership, was instead dabbling in hobbies that had less impact on statecraft than a souffle in a storm. And as for Marie Antoinette, whether she was the misunderstood scapegoat or truly oblivious, we'll leave that to the historians. Yet, there's no denying her image has been seared into history as the ultimate symbol of royal disconnect. As tensions mounted, the cries for change grew louder. The Third Estate was tired of being the underdog, the unsung hero in this tragic opera. They were ready to take center stage, and nothing, not even the king's best locksmithing skills, could keep the lid on this Pandora's box of social upheaval. The stage was set for a revolution that would reshape France and send shockwaves across the globe. The bread may have been expensive, but the cost of ignoring the people's needs was about to become even higher. France was on the brink of a seismic shift, and the world was watching with bated breath. With the stage set, and the world watching, France was about to pull a grand curtain raiser on the Estates General of 1789. Imagine Louis Roman XVI, our financially challenged monarch, finally realizing that his kingdom's ledger was more dreadful than his attempts at locksmithing. So, what does he do? He calls a meeting of the Estates General, a sort of medieval parliament that hadn't been convened since 1614. Back when Shakespeare was still writing plays and Galileo was peering through his telescope. Talk about being fashionably late. Now, the Estates General was divided into three parts, like a political Neapolitan ice cream. The First Estate, made up of the clergy, the Second Estate, full of nobles, and the Third Estate, representing everyone else, peasants to bourgeoisie. This last group, remember, was 98% of the population. Yet, in a deliciously ironic twist, each estate had just one vote. Yes, one vote per estate. The clergy and nobility could always outvote the Third Estate by joining forces like a couple of schoolyard bullies. It's like inviting 98% of your friends to a party, but giving them one slice of pizza while the other 2% get the rest. Hardly fair, but it was the reality of 1789. As the Estates General gathered at Versailles in May, the Third Estate came armed not just with grievances, but with Enlightenment ideals. Liberty, equality, and fraternity were fresh in their minds. The meeting unfolded with all the grace of a three-legged race at a family reunion. The Third Estate wanted to double its representation to reflect its size, a bold move but logical, given that they were footing most of the tax bill. The king and his advisers, however, were about as receptive to this idea as a cat to a bath. The Third Estate, fed up with getting the short end of the baguette, decided to take matters into their own hands. On June 17, 1789, they declared themselves the National Assembly, asserting they were the true representatives of the French people. This was a seismic shift, like a teenager declaring independence by slamming their bedroom door. And just like that, a new power dynamic was born. But let's pause and consider the optics. This wasn't a unified uprising of the downtrodden masses marching arm in arm. The Third Estate was a motley crew of merchants, lawyers, and even a few sympathetic clergy and nobles. It was less a revolution of the people and more a board meeting gone rogue. Still, their declaration was a bold statement against the old regime, a demand for a new way of doing things. Then came the tennis court oath. Now, you might think they were channeling their inner Raja Federer, but the reality was far less glamorous. When the Third Estate found their meeting room at Versailles locked, some say by accident, others claim by royal decree, they moved to the nearest available space, an indoor tennis court. Here, they swore not to disband until they had drafted a new constitution for France. Picture the scene. No projectors, no PowerPoint, just a bunch of determined men in wigs and breeches pledging to change their nation's destiny. It was defiant, dramatic, and dripping with symbolism. The tennis court oath was a pivotal moment, a declaration that the old order was about as stable as a soufflé. The irony, it was never intended to be revolutionary. These were not radical rabble-rousers. They were moderate reformers who wanted a voice, not an overthrow. Yet the king's stubbornness and the entrenched system left them with little choice. As the National Assembly gained momentum, the old power structure began to wobble. Louis Roman XVI, realizing his grip was slipping faster than an eel, eventually relented and ordered the clergy and nobility to join the National Assembly. But by then, the revolution was already brewing and growing wilder than a vineyard in spring. The romanticized image of a united uprising glosses over the chaos and confusion that reigned. France wasn't so much breaking free as it was falling apart at the seams, with different factions pulling in every direction. In the summer of 1789, rumors swirled faster than a Parisian gossip circle. Talk of foreign troops being brought in to crush the assembly spread like wildfire. Fears of an impending crackdown added fuel to a society already simmering on the edge. The chaos was palpable, and trust was scarcer than bread. But the story was just beginning, and the world waited to see if France would rise like a phoenix or crumble like a house of cards. This was the dawn of change, a revolution of ideas as much as actions. The Third Estate was no longer content to be the silent majority, and their cry for change echoed across the world. As the sun set on the old regime, the question remained, what would rise in its place? With the National Assembly in motion and the tennis court oath etched into the annals of history, France was on the cusp of an upheaval that would redefine its future. The drama was far from over, and the revolution had only just begun. As the National Assembly pushed forward, the air in Paris was electric. Picture a city simmering with tension, like a pot left on the stove while the chef's off chasing Enlightenment ideals. The capital was teetering on the brink, and the Bastille was about to become the unlikely star of an epic PR campaign it never asked for. The Bastille, oh, the Bastille. To call it a fortress would be generous. Think of it as a glorified stone hulk that had seen better days. By 1789, it housed a grand total of 7 prisoners. Yes, you heard right, 7. And not exactly the who's who of political prisoners either. We're talking about a couple of forgers, a couple of lunatics, and a marquis with a penchant for writing scandalous novels. This medieval relic was less about oppression and more of a dodo bird in a world that had moved on. Yet, on July 14, 1789, the Bastille transformed into a symbol of tyranny's downfall. How, you ask? Well, here's where the truth gets murky and legends take flight. Rumors were spreading like wildfire. misinformation that Mardenbane was alive and well. People believed the fortress was brimming with political prisoners, and the king was going to use it as a launching pad for oppression. It was the 18th century equivalent of a viral meme, and like any good meme, it tapped into something deeper. So, the people of Paris, fueled by rumor and righteous indignation, decided it was time to act. They stormed the Bastille with all the fervor of a Black Friday sale. The defenders, a mere 82 soldiers and 32 Swiss guards, were taken aback by the chaos. After a day of fierce fighting, the Bastille's governor, Bernard-René Delaunay, realized the jig was up. He surrendered, and the crowd, in a frenzy, seized control. Delaunay met a grisly end, a victim of the mob's fury, and his head became an impromptu trophy paraded around on a pike. Now, here's where the myth-making really kicks in. The storming of the Bastille was less a strategic military victory and more of a symbolic blow against the ancient regime. It was the ultimate PR coup, turning a crumbling fortress with its motley crew of inmates into a rallying cry for liberty. The government, on the other hand, was caught with its proverbial pants down, a fortress overtaken, and the king's authority left even shakier than before. The fall of the Bastille wasn't just a Parisian affair. It set off a chain reaction across France. Enter the Great Fear, a period of panic and paranoia that swept through the countryside like a summer storm. Peasants, already living on the edge of starvation, were hearing whispers of aristocratic plots to starve them into submission. These were not the idle fancies of the bored and well-fed, but the fears of those who had nothing left to lose. The Great Fear saw peasants rising en masse, not united by ideology, but by the desperate need to survive. They stormed manor houses, burned documents binding them to feudal dues, and in some cases sent the nobility packing. It was less a revolution of ideas and more a frenzied bid for self-preservation. The rural revolt was fueled by hunger and fear, a primal scream against centuries of oppression. But let's not romanticize this as a bucolic uprising of noble farmers. This was chaos, plain and simple. The peasants were not armed with Enlightenment tracts, but with pitchforks and torches. They weren't chanting Rousseau. They were driven by the need to fill their stomachs. The Great Fear was an uprising of necessity, not ideology. Meanwhile, back in Paris, National Assembly was scrambling to keep up with the pace of change. The Bastille's fall had set the revolution ablaze, and the Assembly had to steer this surging tide. They abolished feudal privileges in a bid to quell the unrest, a historic move that swept away centuries of tradition in a single night. Yet, the revolution was proving to be a beast of its own making, and it was clear that France was entering uncharted waters. Now, let's pause to appreciate the irony. The Bastille, a symbol of tyranny, was more of a relic than a real threat. The peasants' revolt wasn't a coordinated effort to reshape society, but a desperate act of survival. And the National Assembly, initially seeking reform, found itself at the helm of a revolution it never quite intended to ignite. In this heady mix of myth and reality, France was discovering that revolutions are unpredictable, messy affairs, a far cry from the romanticized images of unity and purpose. As the dust settled, the world watched with bated breath. The Bastille had fallen, the countryside was in turmoil, and France was a nation on the brink of reinvention. The revolution was far from over, and the future was as uncertain as ever. What would rise from the ashes of the old regime? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. July 14, 1789, had become a watershed moment, a symbol of the people's power to challenge authority and demand change. The revolution was just beginning, and the world was waiting for the next act in this grand historical drama. With the dust from the Bastille still settling, the revolutionaries weren't just twiddling their thumbs. No, they were deep in the business of drafting something monumental, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Think of it as a revolutionary cheat sheet for how a just society should operate. Picture this. It's 1789, and France is trying to redefine itself with a manifesto that would make even the boldest Enlightenment philosophers nod in approval. The Declaration was adopted on August 26, 1789, and it was nothing short of revolutionary. It was like the French were handing out copies of Liberty for Dummies to the world. It laid out principles that sound straightforward today, but were groundbreaking back then, like all men being born free and equal in rights. The Declaration didn't stop there. It laid the groundwork for freedom of speech, religious tolerance, and the separation of powers. These were radical ideas, as radical as Marie Antoinette trading silk for burlap. But before we get too starry-eyed about this document, let's keep it real. While the Declaration spoke grandly of liberty and equality, it had some blind spots. Women, for instance, were conspicuously absent from its provisions. Olympe de Gouges, a playwright and political activist, was quick to call out this oversight with her own Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen in 1791. Her message was clear. You can't call it equality if half the population is left out. Her declaration was a bold move, like bringing a skateboard to a horse and carriage race. The Declaration also had a curious relationship with property. It proclaimed property as an inviolable and sacred right, which sounds noble until you realize it was a nod to the bourgeoisie, the very people who were starting to flex their newfound political muscles. The Declaration was a balancing act, trying to enshrine lofty ideals while keeping the property-owning class on side. It was as much about consolidating power as it was about redistributing it. Meanwhile, outside the realm of philosophical debates and ink-stained drafts, Paris was a city of unrest. Enter the Women's March on Versailles, a pivotal episode that proved you don't need muskets to make a revolution. You just need a lot of angry women and some serious determination. On October 5, 1789, thousands of women, fed up with food shortages and rising bread prices, decided they'd had enough. Armed with whatever they could find, rolling pins, broomsticks, and an unyielding sense of purpose, they marched the 12 miles from Paris to Versailles. Their numbers swelled as they went, like a snowball turning into an avalanche. By the time they reached the gilded gates of Versailles, 6,000 strong, these women were not just demanding bread, they were demanding accountability. The scene was charged, and the king, who probably wished he'd stuck to larksmithing, was forced to listen. The women demanded that the king return to Paris to see for himself the conditions his people were enduring. It was a tense standoff, with the women ultimately proving that they weren't to be trifled with. This march wasn't just a footnote in the annals of the revolution. It was a seismic moment that shook the foundations of royal power. The women of Paris showed that they had a voice, and it was loud enough to be heard in the halls of Versailles. Their actions forced the king to relocate to Paris and face the reality of a monarchy on the brink. But let's peel back the layers of romance surrounding this event. The Women's March on Versailles wasn't some idealized sisterhood of the traveling rolling pins. It was a desperate cry for help, born out of hunger and frustration. These women weren't philosophers or politicians. They were mothers and daughters, driven by the primal need to feed their families. The revolution might have been about lofty ideals, but for these women, it was about survival. And as for the romanticized image of the revolution as a grand and noble cause, well, let's not get too carried away. As the revolution progressed, it became clear that the road to liberty was strewn with political infighting and power grabs. Factions emerged like mushrooms after a rainstorm, each with its own agenda and vision for France's future. The Jacobins, the Girondins, the Cordeliers, they all jostled for supremacy like contestants in a particularly vicious reality TV show. These power struggles were anything but noble. They were messy, often bloody, and driven by ambition as much as ideology. The revolution was a complex tapestry, woven with threads of hope and threads of betrayal. It wasn't a single, unified movement, but a cacophony of voices, each clamoring to be heard above the din. As the National Assembly worked to draft a constitution, the political landscape was shifting beneath their feet. Old alliances were crumbling, new ones were forming, and the stakes were higher than ever. The revolution was a beast of its own making, unpredictable and uncontrollable. It was a time of great change, but also of great uncertainty. A reminder that revolutions are rarely as tidy as history books might suggest. As the year 1789 drew to a close, France stood at a crossroads. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen had set a new standard for human rights, but the reality on the ground was far more complex. The Women's March on Versailles had shown the power of the people, but it had also highlighted the deep divisions within society. And the political infighting that was emerging foreshadowed the turbulent years to come. The revolution was just getting started, with more twists and turns than a Parisian alleyway. The ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity were out there, tantalizingly close yet frustratingly elusive. As France struggled to chart a new course, the rest of the world watched, waiting to see if this radical experiment in democracy would succeed or implode. The stakes were high, and the drama was far from over. Stay tuned, because the story of the French Revolution has a few more surprises in store. As the political landscape in France continued its wild roller-coaster ride, the revolutionary fervor soon made way for what can only be described as a macabre fashion trend, the Reign of Terror. Now, if you're thinking this sounds ominous, you'd be spot on. Picture a time when the guillotine became the must-have accessory for any self-respecting revolutionary, and you've got the gist of it. The year was 1793, and the revolution had taken a sharp turn into a bloody chapter where heads rolled, quite literally. The Reign of Terror wasn't just a phase. It was a full-blown, state-endorsed frenzy of executions, led by the Committee of Public Safety, with Maximilien Robespierre, the man with a name longer than Marie Antoinette's shopping list, at the helm. This was a period where paranoia reached fever pitch. The list of enemies of the state seemed to expand faster than a French chef's waistline at a cheese tasting. Anyone who so much as looked sideways at the new regime risked a one-way trip to the guillotine. Speaking of guillotines, these mechanical marvels were everywhere. In 1793 alone, an estimated 594 people met their end under the guillotine's blade across France. In Paris, the count was about 639. Talk about a sharp drop in population. The guillotine was chillingly efficient, a symbol of egalitarian justice, or so the revolutionaries claimed. Everyone, regardless of class, could face the same swift end. It was a grim kind of equality. Now, let's pause to appreciate the irony. The revolution, which had begun with cries for liberty and equality, was now devouring its own children with the appetite of a particularly ravenous wolf. The ideals of the revolution were being betrayed by the very people who claimed to uphold them. It was as if the revolution had become an Ouroboros, a serpent consuming its own tail. And at the center of this storm were two figures whose fates were sealed long before the blade dropped. King Louis Roman XVI and Marie Antoinette. Louis Roman XVI, the king who might have been better suited to a life of quiet hobbies rather than ruling a nation, faced the music in January 1793. Charged with high treason and crimes against the state, he was sentenced to death in a trial that was more of a foregone conclusion than a fair hearing. As he stood on the scaffold, he attempted to address the crowd, but the drummers drowned him out. A fitting metaphor for his reign, wouldn't you say? On January 21, 1793, Louis Roman XVI met his end, a king unmade by the revolution he couldn't control. Marie Antoinette, the ever-controversial queen, followed her husband to the guillotine in October of the same year. Her trial was a spectacle, with accusations as wild as her rumored hairstyles. The charges ranged from depleting the national treasury to conspiring with foreign powers. The most salacious was an allegation of incest with her son, a baseless claim that showcased the depths to which the revolutionaries would stoop. On October 16, 1793, the once glamorous queen rode a tumbrel to her execution, her final words an apology to her executioner for stepping on his foot. A tragic end to a life both reviled and romanticized. With the royal couple gone, France continued to spiral into chaos. The revolution's ideals seemed more like mirages, distant and unattainable, as the nation roiled in political turmoil. The Committee of Public Safety, in its quest to protect the revolution, became a tyrant in its own right. Robespierre, once the champion of republican virtues, descended into paranoia, seeing enemies everywhere. In an ironic twist of fate, he too would meet the guillotine in July 1794, victim of the very machine he had wielded so ruthlessly. The Reign of Terror ended, leaving behind a France exhausted by bloodshed and betrayal. But the story wasn't over. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, a name that would soon be etched into history with all the subtlety of a lightning bolt. This Corsican military genius rode the waves of revolutionary change with the skill of a surfer in a storm. By 1799, he had maneuvered his way to power, staging a coup d'etat that established him as the first consul of France. It was like watching a master chess player in action, moving pieces with precision and foresight. Napoleon's rise was both swift and stunning. In 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French, transforming the Republic into an empire. Talk about a plot twist. From monarchy to revolution to empire, all in less than 2 decades. Napoleon's reign was marked by military conquests and legal reforms, the latter encapsulated in the Napoleonic Code, a legal framework that still influences laws today. His ambitions stretched from the sands of Egypt to the snows of Russia, painting Europe in broad strokes of glory and devastation. But let's not get lost in the romanticism of Napoleon's empire. His reign was as much about power as it was about progress. While he modernized France and spread revolutionary ideals across Europe, his wars left a trail of destruction and a death toll that reached staggering heights, up to 6 million people, depending on which historian you ask. Napoleon's legacy is complex, a blend of enlightenment and empire, ambition and arrogance. As the dust settled on the Napoleonic Wars, France found itself in a curious position. The revolution had promised liberty, equality, and fraternity, yet the road to those ideals had been paved with contradictions and compromises. The monarchy was gone, but the spirit of the old regime lingered in new forms of authority. The revolution's legacy was both achieved and betrayed, a testament to the messy, unpredictable nature of history. So, what can we take away from this whirlwind tour through revolutionary France? Perhaps it's this. Revolutions are like fires. They can illuminate and consume in equal measure. The French Revolution was a complex tapestry of hope and horror, a reminder that history is never as simple as it seems. It was a time of great change, a crucible in which modern ideals were forged and tested, often at great cost. As we look back on this chapter of history, it's clear that the French Revolution was more than just a series of events. It was an era of profound transformation, a pivot point that reshaped the world. From the spark of rebellion to the rise of an empire, France's journey through revolution and beyond offers lessons in the power and peril of human ambition. The story of the French Revolution is one of ideals and ironies, of dreams realized and dreams deferred. And while the guillotine may no longer cast its shadow, the echoes of that tumultuous time continue to resonate, reminding us of the ever-present tension between the past and the future. In the end, the French Revolution taught us that history is a living, breathing entity, shaped by the actions and ambitions of those who dare to dream and those who dare to act. It reminds us that change is inevitable, but its outcome is never guaranteed. As we close the book on this chapter, let us remember that the true legacy of the French Revolution lies not just in the changes it wrought, but in the questions it continues to pose. What is the true cost of liberty? How do we balance equality with power? And what happens when ideals collide with reality? These are the questions that linger, inviting us to ponder the complexities of our own time as we navigate the ever-shifting tides of history. The streets of ancient Italy were not paved with gold, but with something much more enigmatic, Etruscan ingenuity. Nestled in the rolling hills of what we now call Tuscany, the Etruscans were the mysterious, toga-draped precursors to the Romans, sort of like the older sibling who's too cool for school and always seems to have the best toys. But unlike that sibling, the Etruscans left behind more questions than answers. Their origins are as cloudy as a November day in the Tuscan countryside, and their language, well, let's just say it makes Latin look like a walk in the park. Now, a quick geographical detour. The Etruscans inhabited a region that stretched from the Arno River in the north to the Tiber in the south, cozying up to the Tyrrhenian Sea. This area, Etruria, was a sweet spot for agriculture and trade, a prime piece of real estate in the ancient world. But what really set them apart was their societal structure. Unlike the Greeks, who were busy inventing democracy, the Etruscans thrived on a confederation of city-states, each with its own ruling elite. Think of it as a loose federation of mini-kingdoms where power was as fluid as a glass of their finest wine. Speaking of wine, the Etruscans were quite the connoisseurs, but they weren't just about fancy drinks and lavish banquets. These folks were the Steve Jobs of the ancient world, constantly innovating. They gave us the toga, that Roman fashion staple that's basically the ancient equivalent of a power suit. Picture this, a piece of fabric that was both versatile and timeless, used for formal occasions and casual strolls alike. It was like the little black dress of antiquity. But wait, there's more. The Etruscans also had a knack for architecture. They were the first to use the arch, a simple yet revolutionary design that would go on to support everything from bridges to aqueducts. The Romans, never ones to shy away from borrowing a good idea, took this and ran with it, quite literally building their empire on the strength of Etruscan engineering. Now, don't be fooled by the romanticized image of the toga-clad Etruscan lounging in the sun-dappled hills. These people were industrious, with an economy that thrived on metalwork and trade. They were adept miners and metallurgists, extracting iron, copper, and tin from the earth like ancient alchemists. Their bronze sculptures were the talk of the Mediterranean, and their trade networks spanned the known world, reaching as far as Greece and the Near East. Despite all this, the Etruscans remained shrouded in mystery. Their language, recorded in an alphabet borrowed from the Greeks, is only partially understood today. We know it was non-Indo-European, which makes it as relatable to Latin as a cat is to a cucumber. Imagine trying to read a novel with every third word missing, and you'll get a sense of the challenge historians face. This linguistic puzzle is both tantalizing and frustrating, a reminder that history is full of gaps and ellipses. But the Etruscans didn't just scribble on pottery and tomb walls. They left behind a legacy that would shape the Roman world. Their gods and rituals seeped into Roman religion, their art influenced Roman aesthetics, and their political structures laid the groundwork for Roman governance. It's easy to romanticize the Etruscans as the cultural architects of Rome, but the reality is more complex. They were a people who thrived on innovation and adaptation, qualities that the Romans would later emulate with ruthless efficiency. And while the Etruscans eventually faded into the annals of history, their contributions to Roman culture are undeniable. Without them, Rome might have been just another city on the Italian peninsula, rather than the powerhouse that would dominate the ancient world. So next time you see a Roman arch or a toga party, tip your hat, or your laurel wreath, to the Etruscans. They may have been the unsung heroes of antiquity, but their influence echoes through the corridors of time, reminding us that even the most enigmatic cultures can leave an indelible mark on history. While the Etruscans might have faded into history's dimly lit background, their political puppeteering left a legacy that echoes like a well-timed zinger at a dull dinner party. Let's dive into the reign of the Etruscan kings over Rome, a saga that's part Game of Thrones, part civic engineering seminar. Enter stage left, the Etruscan kings. Now, before you envision a parade of toga-wearing tyrants lounging on thrones, let's set the record straight. The Etruscan contribution to Roman politics was both revolutionary and, well, a bit tumultuous. We're talking about a period when Rome was barely a blip on the Italian peninsula, a scrappy city-state trying to find its place in the sun. The Etruscan kings were like the ambitious CEOs who saw potential in a startup and decided to invest. And invest they did, with some serious urban planning projects that would put modern city councils to shame. Take Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, for instance, often heralded as the first Etruscan king of Rome. Priscus wasn't just a fancy name, he was a bold innovator. Under his reign, Rome saw the construction of the Circus Maximus, a colossal chariot racing stadium that could accommodate 150,000 spectators. That's the ancient equivalent of a Super Bowl crowd, minus the halftime show. Priscus was all about spectacle and public entertainment, knowing full well that bread and circuses were the way to a Roman's heart. But let's not gloss over the grit. The Etruscan kings weren't just about grand designs and public works. They were political animals, maneuvering through alliances and rivalries with the finesse of a chess grandmaster. At the heart of their strategy was the concept of auctoritas. It's the kind of authority that goes beyond power. It's about influence, prestige, and the ability to command respect. The Etruscans wielded auctoritas like a sword, carving out a place for themselves in Roman society. Now, let's talk about the piece de resistance of Etruscan engineering, the Cloaca Maxima. This was no ordinary sewer. It was a marvel of engineering, a feat that would have had civil engineers of any era nodding in approval. Built in the late 6th century BCE, this drainage system was designed to channel waste away from the city and into the Tiber River. It was Rome's answer to urban sanitation, a precursor to modern public health infrastructure. And let's be honest, there's something delightfully ironic about the fact that one of the most enduring legacies of the Etruscan kings is a sewer. It's a reminder that sometimes, History is built on the unglamorous stuff, but all was not sunshine and sewers. The reign of the Etruscan kings wasn't without its fair share of drama. Enter Tarquin the Proud, or Tarquinius Superbus if you're feeling fancy. The last of the Etruscan kings, Tarquin was the kind of ruler who gives tyrants a bad name. His reign was marked by oppression and extravagance, a classic tale of power corrupting absolutely. The story goes that his downfall was sealed by the scandalous act of his son, Sextus, and the tragic fate of Lucretia, a noblewoman. This incident sparked a revolution that led to the end of the monarchy and the birth of the Roman Republic in 509 BCE. It's a classic case of how personal indiscretions can topple empires, a lesson that history loves to repeat. Yet, even in exile, Tarquin's influence lingered like a stubborn ghost at a dinner party. His legacy was a cautionary tale for the Romans, a reminder of the perils of unchecked power. And while the Romans would go on to build an empire that spanned continents, the shadow of the Etruscan kings never quite faded. They were the architects of Rome's early political framework, laying the groundwork for what would become one of history's most formidable civilizations. So, the next time you flush a toilet, remember the Cloaca Maxima and tip your hat to the Etruscans. They may have been dethroned, but their legacy runs deeper than any sewer. In the end, the Etruscan kings were more than just rulers. They were visionaries who dared to dream big in the muddy banks of the Tiber. And while they couldn't hold on to power forever, their influence seeped into the bedrock of Roman culture, proving that even the most enigmatic peoples can leave a lasting mark on history. And speaking of enduring marks, let's talk about the Etruscans' contribution to the supernatural side of Rome, the divine drama that unfolded in temples and under the open sky. If you thought the Etruscans were just about sewers and architecture, think again. These folks were the OG spiritual influencers, setting trends in religious practices long before it was cool. They had a knack for peering into the cosmos and reading the whims of the gods like a celestial horoscope. Spoiler alert, the Romans were all ears. First up, let's dive into the mystical world of haruspicy. Picture this, an Etruscan priest, known as a haruspex, standing with a knife in hand, ready to perform the ultimate act of divination. The haruspex would examine the entrails of a sacrificed animal, often a sheep or chicken, and interpret the god's will from the liver's shape and texture. It was like reading tea leaves, but with a lot more blood and guts. For the Etruscans, the liver was the iPad of divine communication, a visceral tablet that provided insights into everything from personal decisions to matters of state. The Romans, ever the pragmatic borrowers, adopted this practice with gusto. They didn't just take the Etruscan word for it. They went full-scale haruspex fever. Roman leaders would consult these entrail magicians before heading into battle or making political moves. It was a serious business, with each organ holding a specific meaning. A liver blemish could spell doom, while a perfectly formed gallbladder might signal victory. It was a system as precise as Roman military formations, and just as influential. But divination wasn't all about internal organs. The Etruscans were also big on augury, the art of interpreting the will of the gods through the flight patterns of birds. In their view, the sky was a divine canvas, and birds were the brushes painting messages across it. If a flock of birds veered left instead of right, that could change the course of history. It's a bit like checking your horoscope before a big meeting, but with flocks of birdies instead of star signs. The Romans, not ones to miss out on a good omen, incorporated augury into their state religion. They appointed official augurs who had the enviable job of bird-watching from the city's sacred hills. The augurs wielded considerable power, influencing everything from military campaigns to the outcome of elections. Talk about a career where you could say, "I'm just winging it," and mean it literally. And then there were the gods themselves. The Etruscans had a pantheon that was as diverse as a Roman street market, with deities for everything under the sun and moon. The Romans, ever the magpies, borrowed liberally from this divine ensemble, adopting gods like Tinia, Uni, and Minerva, who would later morph into Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. These Etruscan deities weren't just given a Latin makeover. They were woven into the very fabric of Roman religion. They were the spiritual equivalent of a successful rebranding campaign, complete with temples that echoed Etruscan architectural styles. Speaking of architecture, the Romans snagged more than just divine inspiration from their northern neighbors. Etruscan temples were the blueprints for Roman religious structures. The Etruscans were masters of the podium-style temple, elevated structures with a deep porch and a wide staircase leading to the entrance. It was an architectural style that screamed power and piety, and the Romans were more than happy to replicate it across their burgeoning empire. It's like the ancient version of borrowing your neighbor's Wi-Fi password. Once you've got it, you're downloading everything you can. But let's not get too swept away in this mystical narrative without acknowledging the practicalities. The Etruscans were savvy in using religion as a tool for social cohesion and political control. By establishing a shared religious framework, they could unify their city-states and legitimize their rule. Rome, in turn, used religion to cement its identity, binding its citizens to the state with rituals and festivals that were as much about community as they were about the divine. It was a divine quid pro quo that kept the wheels of society well-oiled. And here's the kicker. In adopting these practices, the Romans didn't just import beliefs, they imported a worldview. The Etruscans saw the universe as a complex, interconnected web where gods and humans constantly interacted. This notion of divine interplay shaped the Roman approach to governance, warfare, and daily life. It was like having a cosmic co-pilot guiding every decision, from the mundane to the monumental. So, as we wrap up this mystical journey through Etruscan influence, remember that their legacy is more than just rituals and guards. It's a testament to the power of cultural exchange and adaptation. The Romans took these Etruscan elements and wove them into a tapestry that would define their civilization for centuries. And while the Etruscans may have vanished into the mists of history, their impact is as enduring as the timeless question of whether Mercury is in retrograde. Stay tuned, because the story of Etruscan influence on Rome is far from over. We've still got more roads to travel, more myths to bust, and a few more Roman toga parties to crash. Consider this your invitation to the next chapter of our ancient adventure. As we continue our whirlwind tour of Etruscan influence on Roman culture, let's pivot from the ethereal musings of divine entrails to the very tangible world of art and architecture. If you've ever strolled through an art gallery or admired a historical building, you've seen the echoes of Etruscan creativity. These folks weren't just dabbling in sculpture and design, they were setting trends that would shape the aesthetic soul of Rome. First up, let's talk terracotta. Forget the image of delicate porcelain teacups. We're discussing robust, earthy creations that were as much about function as they were about form. The Etruscans were masters of this medium, crafting everything from roof tiles to intricate sculptures. Terracotta was the ancient equivalent of a 3D printer, allowing artists to create detailed works with relative ease. And boy, did it catch on. The Romans, always keen to snag a good idea, embraced terracotta with open arms, or perhaps open kilns, using it for everything from public buildings to private homes. Take, for example, the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, a structure that stood as a testament to Etruscan architectural flair. Constructed on the Capitoline Hill in the late 6th century BCE, it was a marvel of design, complete with a roof adorned by terracotta statues. These statues, crafted by the famed Etruscan sculptor Vulca, included a chariot-driven Jupiter that would have made even the most stoic Roman pause in awe. This wasn't just art. It was a statement of power, a declaration that Rome was a force to be reckoned with, thanks in no small part to Etruscan artistry. But let's not stop there. The Etruscans were also pioneers in funerary practices, and their tombs are an archaeological treasure trove. These were not mere resting places. They were elaborate celebrations of life and death, designed to send the deceased off in style. The tombs of Servidary and Tarquinia, for example, are decorated with vibrant frescoes that offer a window into the Etruscan view of the afterlife. Scenes of banquets, dances, and mythical creatures adorn the walls, creating a narrative tapestry that's part history, part mythology, and all art. This approach to death as an extension of life itself made its way into Roman culture. The Romans, never ones to miss out on a good spectacle, adopted and adapted these practices. They built monumental tombs and sarcophagi, often commissioning artists to carve intricate reliefs depicting scenes from mythology or the deceased's life. These were the Instagram stories of the ancient world, showcasing status and legacy for all eternity, or at least until the next invader came knocking. And here's where we bust a myth: the romantic notion that Roman art was purely an original creation. In truth, much of what we consider quintessentially Roman was heavily influenced by the Etruscans. The Romans weren't shy about borrowing. Okay, let's be real, outright copying styles and techniques. They took the Etruscan love for realism and narrative and ran with it, creating art that was both deeply personal and publicly grandiose. It's like the cultural equivalent of borrowing your sibling's clothes and then acting like you invented the style. Now, let's shift our gaze to the Etruscan influence on Roman portraiture. While the Greeks were busy idealizing the human form, the Etruscans were all about capturing the essence of the individual. Their portraits, particularly those found in funerary contexts, were characterized by a striking realism. This wasn't about airbrushing imperfections. It was about celebrating unique features, the distinctive quirks that made someone who they were. It's a tradition that the Romans would wholeheartedly embrace, leading to the development of veristic portraiture, those hyper-realistic busts that look like they could launch into a monologue at any moment. Economically, the Etruscans' artistic endeavors weren't just about aesthetics. They were a cornerstone of their trade. Their pottery, metalwork, and jewelry were highly sought after across the Mediterranean, from Greece to Carthage and beyond. The Etruscans were the ancient world's equivalent of luxury brands, with their goods fetching premium prices in distant markets. This trade not only enriched their coffers, but also spread their artistic influence far and wide, laying the groundwork for what would become the Roman Empire's vast network of cultural exchange. Let's not forget the political and social context. Art was more than just decoration. It was a tool of propaganda and social cohesion. Etruscan rulers commissioned grand works to legitimize their power and promote social stability. This was art with an agenda, a visual manifesto that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. The Romans, ever the pragmatic visionaries, saw the value in this and adopted it wholeheartedly. They understood that a well-placed statue or fresco could shape public perception and reinforce the narrative of Roman superiority. But it wasn't just the elite who benefited. Etruscan art had a democratic edge, permeating every facet of society. From the grand temples to the humble household objects, art was a part of daily life. This accessibility made it a unifying force, a shared cultural language that transcended social boundaries. It's a legacy that the Romans would continue, using art to bridge the gap between the patrician and plebeian classes, creating a shared sense of identity that was crucial for the cohesion of their sprawling empire. So, as we wrap up this chapter on Etruscan artistry, remember that their legacy is more than just a collection of beautiful objects. It's a testament to the power of art as a cultural force, a reminder that creativity can shape civilizations and leave an indelible mark on history. The Etruscans may have been overshadowed by the Romans, but their influence is as enduring as the terracotta they loved so much. And as we continue our journey through the annals of ancient history, let's keep in mind that the stories of the past are often more complex and more fascinating than we might imagine. Stay with us as we venture further into the tapestry of Etruscan and Roman interconnections, peeling back the layers of history to uncover the truths that lie beneath the surface. There's more intrigue, innovation, and imagination to explore, so don't stray too far. We've got plenty more toga tales and terracotta treasures to uncover in our next installment. As we dive deeper into the tapestry of Etruscan and Roman interconnections, it's time to confront a sobering truth. Even the most vibrant cultures can fade into the annals of history. The Etruscans, with their flair for innovation and mastery of art, were no exception. Despite their profound influence, they eventually succumbed to the inexorable march of Roman expansion. But before we cue the funeral dirge, let's unravel how this enigmatic civilization fell and what it left behind. The decline of the Etruscans was less of a dramatic collapse and more of a slow fade, like the ending of a long-running TV series that everyone loved but no one quite noticed was slipping off the air. By the 4th century BCE, Rome was on a meteoric rise, and the Etruscans, with their loose federation of city-states, were struggling to keep up. Economic pressures, internal strife, and external threats, oh my, created the perfect storm for their decline. While they were busy navigating these challenges, Rome was busy perfecting the art of conquest. Enter stage right, the Roman conquest of Etruria. This wasn't your typical hostile takeover. Think of it as Rome inviting itself over for dinner and then slowly taking over the entire menu. The Etruscans, with their rich lands and strategic locations, were prime real estate for a burgeoning empire. By 265 BCE, the Romans had effectively annexed Etruria, turning the once mighty confederation into a series of Roman territories. It was a classic case of, if you can't beat M, join M, except the Etruscans didn't really have a choice. But let's not paint Rome as the villain in this saga. The Romans were equal opportunity conquerors, absorbing what they admired and discarding what didn't suit their imperial ambitions. Etruscan culture was no exception. Roman society, ever the cultural sponge, soaked up Etruscan innovations like a thirsty traveler with a bottomless goblet. From religious rituals to architectural techniques, the Etruscans' greatest hits became part of Rome's repertoire. It was cultural assimilation on an epic scale, a testament to the Romans' ability to adapt and evolve. Consider, for example, the Roman Triumph, a lavish parade to celebrate military victories. While the Romans perfected the pomp and circumstance, the origins of this spectacle can be traced back to Etruscan religious processions. The Etruscans knew how to throw a party with divine flair, and the Romans were more than happy to take notes. They adopted the concept, added a dash of Roman grandeur, and voila, a tradition that would endure for centuries. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, the myth of Rome as a wholly original creation. The reality is far more nuanced. The Romans were master curators of culture, cherry-picking elements from their neighbors and blending them into something uniquely Roman. The Etruscans played a starring role in this cultural mashup, providing the Romans with a foundation upon which to build their empire. It's like the remix that becomes more famous than the original track. Without the Etruscans, Rome might have been a one-hit wonder. Economically, the Roman conquest of Etruria was a game-changer. Etruscan lands were fertile and rich in resources, providing Rome with a steady supply of agricultural products and raw materials. This bolstered the Roman economy, fueling its expansionist dreams. The Etruscans had been formidable traders, and their networks became valuable assets for the Roman Empire. It was a win-win for Rome, a classic case of empire building through strategic acquisition. Politically, the Etruscans left an indelible mark on Roman governance. The concept of the Senate, that august body of wise, and occasionally not so wise, elders, owes much to Etruscan political structures. The Etruscans had councils of nobles who advised their kings, a precursor to the Roman Senate's advisory role. It was a model of governance that the Romans would refine and expand upon, creating a political institution that would endure for centuries. But let's not get too bogged down in politics without acknowledging the human element. The Etruscans were a people of innovation and adaptation, qualities that resonated with the Romans. Their legacy is a reminder that history is a tapestry woven from countless threads, each contributing to the overall picture. The Etruscans may have been overshadowed by Rome, but their influence is woven into the very fabric of one of history's greatest empires. As we wrap up this journey through Etruscan and Roman history, let's reflect on their enduring legacy. The Etruscans, with their enigmatic language and vibrant culture, were more than just a footnote in Roman history. They were the architects of innovation, the pioneers of artistry, and the spiritual guides who laid the groundwork for Rome's ascent. Their story is a testament to the power of cultural exchange and adaptation, a reminder that even the most enigmatic cultures can leave a lasting mark on history. So next time you find yourself marveling at a Roman arch or pondering the mysteries of ancient rituals, take a moment to tip your laurel wreath to the Etruscans. They may have faded into history's shadows, but their legacy shines as brightly as ever, illuminating the path of human progress. And as we continue to explore the rich tapestry of the past, let's remember that the stories of ancient civilizations, with all their triumphs and tragedies, are as relevant today as they were millennia ago. And there you have it, the tale of the Etruscans and their indelible impact on Rome. It's a story of cultural inheritance, of how a civilization can rise, influence, and eventually be absorbed into something greater. As we close this chapter, let's carry forward the lessons of the past, that innovation thrives on collaboration, that adaptation is key to survival, and that even the most mysterious chapters of history hold valuable insights for the future. Until next time, Keep your curiosity sharp and your sense of wonder alive. There's always more history to discover. The sun's barely crawled over the horizon, and you're already yanked from your dreams by the clamor of Roman life. No snooze button here, buddy. This is ancient Rome, where waking up is less about the gentle morning light and more about the racket of carts, vendors, and maybe a stray chicken or two. You're a craftsman, a cog in the grand Roman machine, and you've got some work to do. Now, before you dive into the day, let's talk hygiene. Forget your modern notions of scented soaps and steamy showers. In your world, cleanliness is a bit more tactile. Enter the strigil, your trusty tool for scraping off yesterday's grime. It's a curved metal scraper, and while it might sound like a medieval torture device, it's just your typical morning routine. You'll slather on some olive oil. No, not because you're going for a Mediterranean glow, but because it helps lift the dirt. Then you scrape it all off, leaving you moderately clean. Let's face it, Roman hygiene is less about smelling like roses and more about not smelling like a stable. With your skin scraped and your toga in place, it's time to fuel up. Breakfast is a modest affair. You're not feasting on eggs and bacon. Think bread, the cornerstone of your diet. Bread in Rome costs about 2 asses a loaf, cheap enough to keep you fed, expensive enough to remind you why you work so hard, and don't expect a quiet meal. The streets are alive with chatter as your neighbors, fellow craftsmen, and merchants all hustle to start their day. Ah, the streets of Rome, bustling, vibrant, and let's be honest, a bit chaotic. Forget the romantic notion of marble-paved avenues. You're navigating a maze of narrow, winding alleys. They're teeming with life, from the rich aroma of fresh bread to the more pungent scent of, well, humanity. And watch where you step, because sanitation isn't exactly Rome's strong suit. Public toilets are a communal affair, and sewers are rudimentary at best. Your stroll to work is like a game of hopscotch around questionable puddles. Now, let's tackle one of the great myths of Roman life, the baths. Sure, they sound like the ultimate in luxury, and if you were fabulously wealthy, maybe they were. But for you, the baths are more social hub than spa retreat. You'd visit the thermi not just to clean up, but to catch up on gossip and maybe do a little business networking. And yes, it's communal. No privacy here, just a big room filled with steam, chatter, and more exposed skin than you might be comfortable with. Glamorous, not quite. Functional, absolutely. Back to the streets, where the rhythm of Rome is palpable. You dodge a vendor hawking garum, the fish sauce that Romans inexplicably adore. You pass by the Forum, the beating heart of Roman politics and commerce. It's a place where senators debate, merchants haggle, and philosophers ponder the meaning of it all. But you've got your own empire to build, and that means keeping your head down and your hands busy. Roman society is a complex beast. You, as a craftsman, are part of the plebeian class. You're not a patrician sipping wine in a villa, but you're not a slave either. You have your own shop, your own tools, and a trade passed down through generations. In a city of over 1 million people, yes, Rome was a bustling metropolis even by today's standards. Craftsmen like you are essential, the unsung heroes who keep the city running. And here you are, amidst the chaos and clamor, a craftsman in the midst of it all. Your skills are in demand, but so is your time. The day stretches out before you, full of possibility and the usual Roman chaos. But for now, you've got work to do, bread to earn, and maybe, just maybe, a moment to appreciate the wild, wonderful world that is ancient Rome. Your workshop isn't just any old shop. It's the lifeblood of your existence, the place where you transform raw materials into something as close to magic as a Roman can get. As you step inside, the familiar scent of sawdust and iron fills your lungs. It's a heady mix, your own brand of morning coffee. The tools of your trade hang on the walls, ready and waiting like soldiers at attention. You've got everything from chisels to hammers, each with its own specific purpose, and each a testament to the ingenuity of Roman engineering. Let's talk about the economics of your craft, because, let's face it, you're not just doing this for fun. Iron is your bread and butter. Well, not literally, because that would be a terrible sandwich. The cost of iron runs about 8 denarii per libra, and considering the average Roman laborer earns about 3-4 denarii a day, it's a hefty investment. It's like choosing between paying rent or splurging on a weekend getaway, only your choice involves the very survival of your business. Every denarius counts, and there's no room for waste, not when competition is fierce, and the market as cutthroat as a gladiator match. Speaking of competition, Let's dive into the delightful world of guild politics. The collegia, Rome's answer to the modern trade union. These guilds are your ticket to networking, protection, and occasionally a bit of old-fashioned backstabbing. You see, guilds are more than just professional associations. They're power brokers in their own right. Being part of one is a bit like being in a secret club, only without the cool handshake. They set the rules, control the prices, and make sure everyone plays nice, or at least pretends to. Don't even think about setting your prices too low or working outside the guild's rules, unless you fancy an impromptu meeting with some very persuasive colleagues. In this world of iron and intrigue, your social status is as much a part of your toolkit as any hammer or chisel. You're a craftsman, a plebeian with skills that keep the city's heart beating. You're not a patrician, lounging in opulent villas, but you're not exactly living hand-to-mouth either. Your toga, the Roman equivalent of the business suit, might not scream wealth, but it does convey respectability. Let's dispel a common myth here. Not all togas are created equal. Yours is more function than fashion, a sign that you're a free man with a trade to call your own. Forget the pristine white togas of the upper class. Yours sees the grit and grime of honest work. It's less of a status symbol and more of a declaration. You're here, you're working, and you're not going anywhere. Now, why does any of this matter? Because craftsmanship is the backbone of Roman society. It's the quiet, unassuming force that keeps the city from crumbling under its own weight. Without craftsmen, the grand architecture of Rome would be little more than ambitious sketches on parchment. The swords of legionnaires and the plows of farmers would be mere dreams. Your work ensures the city functions smoothly, and for that, you've earned your place in the social hierarchy, even if it isn't at the top. As you set to work, the rhythmic clang of hammer on metal becomes your melody. It's a sound that echoes through the streets, a reminder of the industrious hands behind Rome's grandeur. And yet, for all the sweat and toil, there's a certain romance to it. You're not just building objects, you're crafting stories, leaving your mark on a city that will stand for centuries. Amid the noise and clamor, there's a quiet dignity in your labor, a testament to the enduring spirit of the craftsman. In this city, of a million souls, where emperors rise and fall and fortunes are made and lost, your craft is a constant. It's a bridge between the past and the future, a thread that weaves through the fabric of Roman life. And as the day unfolds, with its inevitable challenges and small victories, you find solace in the knowledge that your work, humble as it may be, has its own kind of immortality. Speaking of feeding the beast, let's dive into the world of Roman midday meals, a subject that might not initially scream excitement, but stick with me. Your morning work has left you peckish, so it's time to refuel. Now, if you're imagining a lavish Roman feast with reclining diners and endless courses, I've got a reality check for you. The truth is, most Romans ate simply and quickly, often standing up. Lunch, or *cibus meridianus*, if you're feeling fancy, is no exception. Forget the orgy of excess myth. Think more along the lines of a quick pit stop at the local taverna. These bustling joints are the ancient world's answer to fast food, minus the drive-through. You won't find golden arches, but you will find a lively mix of citizens grabbing a bite in between their daily grind. Here, the social dynamics are as rich and varied as the dishes on offer. For a craftsman like you, the taverna is a melting pot, where plebeians rub elbows with slaves, and the occasional freedman, all united by the universal need to eat. Your meal might consist of *pulse*, a porridge-like concoction made from emmer wheat. It's the Roman equivalent of oatmeal, if oatmeal were gritty and slightly bland. Pulse is the staple of the lower classes, and while it might not be haute cuisine, it's fuel for your labor, cheap and filling. You've got a couple of choices for toppings. A sprinkle of herbs, perhaps a drizzle of honey if you're feeling indulgent. But don't get too carried away. Honey's not cheap, and you've got wine to think about. Wine, the lifeblood of Roman society. It's more common than water in some parts, and a cup of the house red will set you back about one as. But before you conjure images of sipping fine vintages, know this. Roman wine is often mixed with water, sweetened with honey, or spiced to mask its less-than-stellar quality. The swankier vintages, the ones with names like Caecuban and Falanian, are reserved for the elite and their endless banquets. For you, it's the rough stuff, good enough to wash down your pulse and keep your spirits up. Now, the taverna isn't just for eating. It's a hub for exchanging news, gossip, and the occasional rumor. It's a place where deals are made, and alliances forged over bowls of stew and cups of wine. The air is thick with the chatter of patrons discussing everything from the latest gladiator match to the ever-changing political winds. And speaking of politics, let's not forget the ever-looming presence of patronage. In Rome, your survival often depends on the patron-client system, a network of mutual obligations that would make any modern pyramid scheme blush. As a craftsman, you're likely part of this web, bound to a patron who can offer protection, business opportunities, and maybe even a whisper in the right ear when needed. In return, your skills and loyalty are at their disposal. It's a delicate dance, this patronage game, and you must navigate it with the finesse of a tightrope walker. A good patron can elevate your status and bring in work. A bad one can ruin you faster than you can say caveat emptor. The political machinations and social hierarchies of Rome are as intricate as a mosaic, each piece interlocking with another to create a picture of power and ambition. And while it might seem like this system is designed to keep the elite in power, there's a certain genius to it. Patronage is the social glue that holds the society together, ensuring that even the most humble craftsman has a role to play in the grand tapestry of Roman life. But let's steer back to the taverna, where your midday meal concludes with a final gulp of wine. The food may be simple, the company mixed, but there's a certain camaraderie in the shared experience of breaking bread, or pulse, as it were. It's a reminder that in this sprawling metropolis, amidst the marble temples and crowded streets, it's the small, everyday moments that sustain you. As you step back into the chaos of Rome's streets, the midday sun high above, the rhythm of the city calls you back to work. The afternoon is yours to seize, with its blend of toil and opportunity. You'll return to your workshop, the place where your hands shape the city's future one piece at a time. But for now, with the taste of wine lingering and the sounds of the taverna fading, you carry on, just another thread in the vibrant tapestry of Rome. As you step back into the swirling chaos of Rome's streets, the midday sun blazing above, it's time to dive into the bustling world of the Roman market. Welcome to the epicenter of commerce, where haggling is both art and blood sport, and every coin exchange feels like a miniature war won or lost. Your afternoon agenda, haggle like your life depends on it, because, let's be honest, in this economy, it kind of does. Picture yourself maneuvering through the forum, that grand stage of Roman life. It's the beating heart of the city's economy, practically vibrating with the energy of countless transactions. Merchants hawk their wares with the enthusiasm of a street performer trying to draw a crowd. Fruits, vegetables, olives, and more exotic goods from the far reaches of the empire spill out of stalls. Spices from the east, glassware from Egypt, and textiles from the Levant, all a testament to Rome's vast trade network. It's like a chaotic symphony of commerce, with you trying to play your part without missing a beat. Let's debunk a myth here, the notion of Roman efficiency. Romans were indeed masters of engineering and architecture, but when it comes to market dealings, efficiency often takes a backseat to drama. Negotiations are less like a smooth transaction and more like the gladiatorial games, intense, unpredictable, and sometimes downright savage. The price you eventually settle on for that iron shipment, it's less about the intrinsic value and more about who can outmaneuver whom in the verbal arena. Now, let's talk numbers. You're eyeing some high-quality iron, which in this high-stakes marketplace can set you back around 8 to 10 denarii per libra. The price fluctuates depending on supply, demand, and frankly, how well you can sweet-talk the vendor. Remember, the average Roman laborer pockets about 3-4 denarii a day, so every denarius you shave off matters. It's the difference between a profitable week and one spent scraping by. But wait, there's more. While you're busy haggling, don't forget the larger economic forces at play. The Roman economy is a sprawling beast, fueled by a complex web of trade routes that span continents. The empire's roads, famously straight and sturdy, are the veins through which goods flow. They stretch from the windswept hills of Britannia to the sun-baked sands of Egypt, creating a network as intricate as a Roman mosaic. It's a marvel of engineering, sure, but don't romanticize it too much. Those roads, they're not just for the swift movement of goods. They're also perfect for marching legions, the not-so-gentle reminder of who's really in charge. While we're myth-busting, let's tackle transportation. Today, we've got shipping containers and cargo planes. Back then, you had oxen and wooden carts. Transporting goods wasn't a walk in the Roman park. It was a logistical nightmare. Imagine trying to move a ton of iron from Gaul to Rome. It's a journey of over 1,000 miles, and you're at the mercy of the elements, bandits, and the occasional bureaucratic hiccup. The term, supply chain issues, takes on a whole new meaning when you're dealing with muddy roads and temperamental mules. And yet, against these odds, the system works. Sort of. Goods do eventually make it to where they're supposed to go, if not exactly on time. It's a testament to Roman determination, if not their efficiency. The roads are a double-edged sword. They connect, but they also expose. For every merchant cart, there's a tax collector waiting to take his cut. The Roman tax system is nothing if not thorough, and every transaction is a reminder of the empire's omnipresent reach. Back at your stall, the afternoon sun is relentless, but so are you. Orders need fulfilling, and as a craftsman, your reputation is on the line. You're not just selling goods, you're selling quality and reliability. In a city where word of mouth can make or break you, maintaining standards is non-negotiable. You handle each piece with care, knowing that it's not just a product but a piece of your legacy. Amidst the clamor of the market, there's a sense of camaraderie. Fellow craftsmen nod in passing, acknowledging the shared struggle. It's a tough, competitive world, but there's respect among those who understand the grind. You're part of a community, bound by the common goal of survival and the occasional triumph. The Roman market is a microcosm of the empire itself, vibrant, chaotic, and endlessly fascinating. It's a place of opportunity, where fortunes can be made and lost in the blink of an eye. For you, it's another day in the life, another chapter in the ongoing saga of a craftsman navigating the complexities of ancient Rome. As the afternoon wanes and your orders are fulfilled, you prepare to pack up. The sun dips lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the bustling marketplace. You take a moment to appreciate the scene, the hum of voices, the clinking of coins, the distant sounds of a city that never truly sleeps. It's a reminder that while the world around you is ever-changing, some things remain constant. The hustle, the ambition, the indomitable spirit of those who call Rome home. With your business concluded for the day, you head back through the winding streets, your mind already turning to the next task. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges and opportunities, and you'll meet them head-on, as always. After all, in this sprawling metropolis, amidst the grandeur and grime, you're not just surviving, you're thriving in your own way. The rhythm of the city pulses through you, and as you make your way home, you can't help but feel a sense of pride. You're a craftsman in ancient Rome, part of a rich tapestry that stretches across time, and you wouldn't have it any other way. The city slowly sheds its frenetic daytime persona as the amber hues of evening begin their descent. The sounds of commerce fade, replaced by a different kind of buzz, the chatter of Romans unwinding. You, a seasoned craftsman, are no stranger to this shift. It's time to swap the clang of iron for the clink of cups and the hum of conversation as you join the throng heading towards the evening's diversions. Now, let's talk about the social life of a Roman craftsman. You might not be hobnobbing with senators or taking part in opulent feasts, but you've got your own brand of Roman fun to look forward to. Think less lavish banquet and more local tavern gathering. The evening's entertainment options are as diverse as the empire itself. For a start, there's the amphitheater, the ancient world's answer to Netflix, just with a bit more blood. Gladiatorial games. Now there's an activity steeped in myth. Hollywood has given us images of epic battles, noble warriors, and roaring crowds. But here's the gritty truth. Gladiator fights were as much about survival as spectacle. Tickets to the games were surprisingly accessible for the masses. Depending on the event, you might shell out a few sestertii for a spot in the nosebleed section. For comparison, a sestertius is about a quarter of a denarius, so you won't be breaking the bank unless you're aiming for the VIP experience, which, surprise, involves a lot more than just better seats. These games were a curious mix of sport and ritual, and yes, they were often brutal. But they were also heavily regulated with referees, rules, and even a touch of showmanship. Gladiators weren't all slaves or condemned criminals. Some were free men who chose the life for fame and fortune. And while the romantic idea of the noble gladiator is appealing, the reality was a lot grimmer. A career in the arena was short and brutal, with survival rates lower than that of a modern-day reality TV star's fame. If watching life and death struggles isn't your idea of a relaxing evening, maybe you prefer a trip to the theater. Roman theater had its own charm, with comedies, tragedies, and even mime shows. Admission could be free, thanks to a generous sponsor eager to win public favor. Picture a bustling venue filled with citizens eager for a laugh or a cry, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of roasted nuts. The plays might be in Latin, but their themes, love, betrayal, power, are timeless. Now, let's switch gears to something a bit more spiritual. Religion and superstition were woven into the very fabric of Roman life. You couldn't swing a cat without hitting a temple or shrine. These weren't just places of worship, but also community hubs. Romans were pragmatic about their gods, seeing them as patrons to be appeased rather than all-knowing deities. You might toss a coin into a fountain for luck, or offer a sacrifice before a big trade deal. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the idea of Roman religion as a monolithic system. It was more like a buffet, with Romans picking and choosing gods, adopting new ones from conquered lands, and sometimes discarding old ones like last season's toga. Superstitions were everywhere, omens, auguries, and the ever-present evil eye. You'd avoid starting a journey on certain days, or maybe wear an amulet for protection. The world was full of unseen forces, and it paid to stay on their good side. It's a mindset that might sound quaint now, but it was an integral part of Roman life, offering a semblance of control in a capricious world. As the evening deepens, you find yourself at a local tavern, a cozy haven where the worries of the day are drowned in cups of cheap wine. The air is thick with laughter, the kind that bubbles up after a long day's toil. Here, you rub elbows with fellow craftsmen, traders, and the odd philosopher spouting wisdom between sips. The walls echo with tales of the day's triumphs and failures, each story punctuated by the clatter of dice or the strum of a lyre. In this setting, your place in Roman society feels tangible. You're not just a cog in the machine, you're part of the engine that keeps it running. Your craft is your legacy, a tangible contribution to the city's grandeur. Sure, you're not immortalized in marble, but your work leaves its mark in every nail, every tool, every household item that bears your touch. As the night wears on, you reflect on your place in this vast empire. Rome, with all its splendor and squalor, is your home. You're a craftsman, a maker in a world of users, and there's a certain pride in that. Your skills are your currency, your craft a bridge between the mundane and the monumental. You might not be hailed as a hero, but in the quiet moments when the city sleeps, you know your worth. The night wraps around you like a familiar cloak as you make your way back through the labyrinthine streets, the distant echoes of a city winding down its only lullaby. Tomorrow, the cycle begins anew, and you'll rise with the dawn, ready to face another day as a craftsman in the eternal city. You're part of a legacy that stretches across time, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who built Rome, one chisel strike, one hammer blow at a time. In the bustling corridors of history, where empires rise and fall with the fickleness of stock market trends, the Byzantine Empire stands out as a peculiar hybrid of innovation and nostalgia. The story kicks off in 330 AD, when Emperor Constantine decided he had enough of Rome's hustle and bustle and founded Constantinople, a city that would become the glittering capital of the Byzantine Empire. Now, before you dismiss the Byzantines as mere Roman wannabes, let's clear the air. While they might have borrowed the Roman architectural toolkit, they were no copycats. They took those Roman blueprints, added a dash of Eastern flair, and turned them into something entirely their own. Constantine was a man with a plan. He wasn't just setting up a new city. He was laying the groundwork for an empire that would last over a millennium, while his old stomping grounds, Rome, was busy being sacked by barbarians. Talk about dodging a bullet. This strategic relocation to Byzantium, later named Constantinople, because why not name a city after yourself? Wasn't just a geographical shift. It was the beginning of a new architectural era. The city was strategically perched between Europe and Asia, like a historical version of Switzerland, but with more intrigue and less neutrality. As Constantine's architects set to work, they had more on their plates than just a bunch of bricks and mortar. They were tasked with creating a metropolis that would reflect the empire's power and prestige. But here's the kicker. They had to do it while weaving together Roman traditions with Eastern influences. It was like trying to design a smartphone using parts from a typewriter and a rotary phone. But boy, did they rise to the occasion. Now, let's debunk the myth that Byzantine architects were just Roman copycats. Sure, they borrowed heavily from Roman styles, Because why reinvent the wheel when you can add some shiny new rims? But they didn't stop there. They infused their designs with Greek, Persian, and other Eastern influences, creating an architectural medley that was as complex as it was beautiful. The use of domes, for instance, was a game-changer. The Byzantines took the Roman penchant for arches and vaults and pushed it to new heights, literally. To appreciate the genius of Byzantine architecture, one doesn't have to look further than the Hagia Sophia, though we'll dive into its wonders later. For now, let's just say that when it was completed in 537 AD, it was like the Empire State Building of its time, a marvel that left visitors gobsmacked. And it wasn't just about size. Though the Hagia Sophia's dome soaring 180 feet above the ground is nothing to sneeze at, it was about the innovation. Here, the Byzantines showcased an architectural flourish that was both a nod to their Roman roots and a bold step into the future. Constantine's influence wasn't just about grand designs and ambitious projects. He was also a shrewd politician, aware that architecture could serve as a powerful tool for propaganda. The grand structures of Constantinople weren't just buildings, they were statements. They declared to the world that the Byzantine Empire was not only a successor to Rome, but a new power in its own right. This was an empire that had the audacity to believe it could bridge East and West, and its architecture was a physical manifestation of that bold vision. But let's not get too wrapped up in the romanticism of it all. While the architecture of the Byzantine Empire was indeed awe-inspiring, it didn't spring from a vacuum. The empire was a melting pot of cultures, ideas, and yes, conflicts. The blend of styles that became known as Byzantine architecture was as much a product of necessity as it was of creativity. The architects were tasked with accommodating diverse religious, cultural, and political requirements, which meant they had to be as flexible as a Cirque du Soleil performer. And speaking of myths, let's tackle another one. The idea that the Byzantines were just sitting around in opulent palaces, twiddling their thumbs. The reality was far grittier. The empire was constantly under threat, whether from external invaders or internal strife. These challenges were not just footnotes in their history. They were driving forces behind their architectural innovations. Structures needed to be not only grand, but also functional, often doubling as fortifications against the ever-looming barbarian threats. In this historical tapestry, the Byzantines were not mere players but architects of their destiny, quite literally. Their architecture wasn't just about aesthetic pleasure. It was about survival, power, and identity. Each structure told a story, not just of the empire's grandeur, but also of its struggles and triumphs. The Hagia Sophia, for instance, was more than a church. It was a testament to the empire's resilience and ingenuity, standing as a beacon through centuries of chaos and change. So, as we set the stage for the architectural wonders to come, let's remember that the Byzantine Empire was a complex beast. Its architecture was not just a relic of the past, but a living testament to a civilization that dared to dream big and build even bigger. The Byzantines were not just architects in the literal sense. They were architects of an empire that would defy the odds and continue to influence the world long after its fall. In the grand narrative of history, they were not passive observers, but active creators, shaping a legacy that continues to echo through time. Now, speaking of architectural ambition, let's dive headfirst into the Byzantine Empire's piece de résistance, the Hagia Sophia. Imagine the year is 537 AD, and Emperor Justinian is sitting on his throne, likely stroking his beard and pondering how to outdo every single architectural achievement of his time. Spoiler alert, he nailed it. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just another church. It was a statement, a colossal, in-your-face declaration that said, Byzantium is here to stay, and we're not playing small. Now, what makes the Hagia Sophia the architectural equivalent of a mic drop? For starters, let's talk about the dome, an engineering feat that still leaves architects scratching their heads. This wasn't any ordinary dome. It was a massive, floating wonder that seemed to defy the laws of physics. Spanning a jaw-dropping 102 feet in diameter and soaring 180 feet into the air, it was like the Empire State Building of domes, but built with the ancient equivalent of duct tape and prayers. And here's the kicker. It was all done under the watchful eye of Justinian, who didn't just want a building, he wanted a legacy. The construction of the Hagia Sophia was a Herculean task, orchestrated by two masterminds, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. Think of them as the Frank Lloyd Wrights of the 6th century, but without the Pinterest boards. These guys weren't just architects, they were innovators, pushing the boundaries of what was possible with brick and mortar. The challenge: create a dome that didn't just sit there like a hat on a building, but seemed to hover like a celestial body. And oh boy, did they deliver. Using a technique known as pendentives, they managed to transition the circular base of the dome to the square structure below, a design so clever it's like they hacked the architectural matrix. But let's not kid ourselves. This architectural marvel didn't come cheap. The cost of constructing the Hagia Sophia was astronomical, draining the empire's coffers faster than a teenager with a credit card. The exact figures are lost to history, but estimates suggest it was akin to building a modern-day skyscraper. It was the kind of expenditure that would make a finance minister break out in a cold sweat. Yet Justinian was undeterred, famously declaring, "Salaman, I have outdone thee." A bold claim, but when you've built something that can be seen from miles away, you're allowed a bit of bravado. Of course, with great architecture comes great political maneuvering. The Hagia Sophia wasn't just a church, it was a tool of propaganda. Justinian knew that a building of such grandeur would not only awe his subjects, but also send a clear message to rivals. Byzantium was not to be trifled with. It was a power play wrapped in marble and mosaics, a testament to the empire's wealth and sophistication. Yet, the reality was that the Byzantine economy was under immense strain, much like a stretched rubber band on the verge of snapping. The construction of the Hagia Sophia also took place against a backdrop of political chaos. Just a few years earlier, in 532 AD, the Nika riots had erupted, nearly toppling Justinian's reign. Picture this. The streets of Constantinople were a war zone, with rioters torching buildings and demanding the emperor's head on a platter. In the midst of this chaos, Justinian made the audacious decision to rebuild the Hagia Sophia, as if to say, "You can burn my city, but you can't burn my ambition." The grandeur of the Hagia Sophia was, in many ways, a double-edged sword. While it stood as a beacon of Byzantine achievement, it also highlighted the empire's obsession with monumental architecture, sometimes at the expense of more practical concerns. The Byzantine economy, though resilient, was not invincible. The staggering costs of such projects often led to increased taxation, which, unsurprisingly, didn't win Justinian any popularity contests. The empire's obsession with grand designs often meant that resources were diverted from other vital areas, such as defense and infrastructure. In many ways, the Hagia Sophia was a reflection of the Byzantine psyche, a complex blend of visionary ambition and practical oversight. Yet despite the economic strains and political machinations, the Hagia Sophia endured. It became more than just a church. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of adversity. Over the centuries, it would withstand earthquakes, invasions, and even a few questionable renovations. But through it all, it remained a constant, a reminder of a time when the Byzantine Empire dared to dream big and build even bigger. As we wrap up this chapter on the Hagia Sophia, let's not forget that while it stands as a monument to Byzantine brilliance, it also serves as a cautionary tale. It's a reminder that while monumental architecture can inspire awe and wonder, it often comes with a hefty price tag, both financially and politically. Hagia Sophia is a testament to the heights of human creativity and the depths of human ambition, a legacy that continues to captivate and challenge us to this day. And with that, we leave the Hagia Sophia towering over Constantinople, a beacon of the Byzantine Empire's audacious spirit. Next up, we'll explore how this architectural marvel influenced the world beyond its walls, shaping not just the skyline of a city, but the very course of history itself. So, stay tuned, because if you think the story of the Hagia Sophia is fascinating, just wait until you see how its legacy unfolds in the centuries to come. The Hagia Sophia may have been the star of the Byzantine architectural show, but it wasn't the only act on stage. The Byzantine Empire had a knack for taking what worked, and like a contestant on a reality cooking show, adding their own secret sauce into the evolution of Byzantine churches and their groundbreaking architectural techniques. Because why settle for ordinary when you can have extraordinary? Now, if you thought the Hagia Sophia was a one-hit wonder, you'd be sorely mistaken. Let's take a detour to the Church of St. Vidale in Ravenna, Italy. Built in the mid-6th century, This church might not have the dizzying heights of the Hagia Sophia, but it packs a punch with its own unique style. St. Vidale is like the indie darling of Byzantine architecture, less mainstream, but equally compelling. Its octagonal plan and the clever use of space make it a standout piece in the architectural repertoire. What's so special about St. Vidale, you ask? Well, for one, it's a masterclass in the use of pendentives and mosaics. Pendentives, those architectural saviors, are the unsung heroes of Byzantine design. They allowed architects to transition from a square base to a circular dome, a bit like trying to fit a round peg into a square hole, but with much more finesse. This technique wasn't just a party trick. It was essential for supporting massive domes without the need for a forest of columns. But let's not gloss over the mosaics. Oh, the mosaics. If the Hagia Sophia's dome was a mic drop, the mosaics of St. Vidale are like a fireworks finale at a rock concert. These colorful bits of art weren't just pretty pictures. They were sermons in stone and glass. Take the famous depiction of Emperor Justinian and his entourage. It's a who's who of Byzantine power, with Justinian front and center, looking every bit the part of a ruler who could make or break empires with a flick of his wrist. The mosaics are a vivid reminder of the empire's religious fervor, which sometimes bordered on the fanatical. It's as if they were shouting, "Look at us, we're the chosen ones," a sentiment as unmissable as a neon sign in the desert. Let's not ignore the elephants in the room. Those massive, shimmering mosaics weren't just art for art's sake. They were propaganda pieces, designed to project an image of divine authority and religious legitimacy. Yet they also tell us something about the Byzantine mindset, a blend of piety and pragmatism. These were people who believed in the power of celestial endorsement, but were also savvy enough to use it as a tool for control. The mosaics served as both a spiritual guide and a political playbook, a dual purpose as intricate as the designs themselves. But what drove these architectural innovations? Was it pure artistic ambition or something deeper? The truth is, it was a cocktail of social, religious, and political motivations. The Byzantines weren't just building churches. They were constructing monuments to their faith and power, in a world teetering on the edge of chaos, with barbarian tribes lurking like creditors at a debtor's door. Having a divine insurance policy wasn't just comforting, it was essential. Religious fervor in Byzantium was like a high-stakes poker game, with emperors and bishops betting their chips on heavenly favor. The architectural splendor of churches, like St. Vidale, was a reflection of this zeal. The Byzantines believed that by glorifying God with their earthly creations, they were securing a spot in the heavenly VIP lounge. And who could blame them? In times of uncertainty, clinging to the hope of divine approval was as appealing as a life raft in a stormy sea. Yet, behind the glittering mosaics and majestic domes lay the gritty realities of empire building. Constructing these architectural wonders required resources, manpower, and, of course, cash, a trifecta that often strained the empire's economy. While the common folk gazed in awe at the celestial beauty above, they were also feeling the pinch below, as taxes climbed higher than the domes themselves. The Byzantine economy was a delicate balancing act, forever teetering between grandeur and disaster. So, what can we learn from the architectural evolution of the Byzantine churches? For starters, it's a masterclass in innovation under pressure. The Byzantines were like the original Silicon Valley startups, always pushing the boundaries, always looking for the next big thing. Their churches were not just places of worship. They were canvases of creativity, testament to human ingenuity in the face of adversity. And let's not forget the architects behind these masterpieces, the real MVPs of Byzantine innovation. These were the unsung heroes who turned vision into reality, often working with limited tools and even more limited budgets. The architects of the Byzantine Empire were like modern-day magicians, conjuring up wonders with little more than stone, mortar, and a whole lot of chutzpah. In this grand narrative of Byzantine architecture, each church tells a story, not just of religious devotion, but of power, politics, and the human spirit. They remind us that while the Byzantines may have been obsessed with divine favor, they were also masters of their own earthly destinies. Their churches stand as monuments to a civilization that dared to dream big, build bigger, and sometimes bite off more than it could chew. As we continue our journey through the Byzantine Empire, let's keep our eyes peeled for more of these architectural wonders. Because while the domes and mosaics may have been the main attraction, The real story lies in the intricate dance between faith and ambition, art and power. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine saga is far from over, and there's much more to uncover in the chapters to come. While Byzantine churches were busy dazzling worshippers and intimidating rivals, let's shift gears to a more rugged chapter of Byzantine architecture, the defensive kind. That's right, we're talking about the Theodosian walls, the unsung heroes of Constantinople. These fortifications were less about divine inspiration and more about keeping the empire's enemies at bay. Picture the Theodosian walls as the ultimate "do not disturb" sign for invading hordes. Built in the early 5th century under Emperor Theodosius Roman II, these walls were the medieval equivalent of a home's security system, but with a lot more stone and a lot less technology. Now, if you're imagining a quaint little wall politely asking invaders to leave, think again. The Theodosian walls were a triple-layered monstrosity stretching nearly 4 miles and standing up to 40 feet high. This was no mere garden fence. It was a fortress that wrapped around Constantinople like a mother bear protecting her cubs. And it's not just about height. We're talking about a thickness that ranged from 15 to 20 feet. You could drive a chariot on top of these things, which, let's be honest, sounds like the medieval version of a thrill ride. The construction of these walls was no small feat. It took decades to complete and required a workforce that would make modern construction crews look like a weekend DIY project. The cost? Let's just say it was enough to make an emperor wince. Exact figures are hazy, but maintaining these massive structures was estimated to consume a significant chunk of the imperial budget, like a black hole sucking in resources. It's said that the upkeep alone required a small army of masons, carpenters, and laborers who worked tirelessly to repair any damage caused by the elements, earthquakes, or the occasional battering ram. Speaking of earthquakes, let's not ignore Mother Nature's attempts to have her say. In 447 AD, an earthquake hit the city so hard it was as if Poseidon himself had thrown a tantrum. The walls sustained significant damage, but here's a testament to Byzantine resilience. Within 2 months, the repairs were completed, reportedly with divine assistance if you ask the locals. Divine or not, the speed and efficiency of the repairs were impressive enough to make a modern contractor weep with envy. But here's the kicker. Despite their formidable appearance, the Theodosian walls weren't invincible. They were breached not once, but multiple times. The most famous breach came in 1204 during the Fourth Crusade, when a bunch of crusading knights decided to take a detour from their holy mission to pillage Constantinople instead. Ah, the allure of loot over piety. Who can resist shiny things, right? The walls fell again in 1453 when the Ottomans, led by Sultan Mehmed Roman II, used cannons to blast their way through. It was a harsh wake-up call to the Byzantines, whose overconfidence in their defenses was reminiscent of a certain unsinkable ship we all know. So, what about the myth of Byzantine invincibility? The walls, like the empire they protected, were a mix of brilliance and vulnerability. For centuries, they stood as a testament to Byzantine engineering and strategic prowess. Yet, the very belief in their impregnability became a blind spot. It's like thinking your password is unhackable because it has a special character, only to find out the hacker guessed your cat's name. The Theodosian walls weren't just a physical barrier. They were a psychological one, too. They projected an image of strength and security to the world, a symbol of the empire's might. But beneath the stone and mortar lay the reality that no wall is truly impenetrable. The Byzantines learned the hard way that you can't rest on your laurels, or your laurels will eventually get squashed. In a modern twist, the story of the Theodosian walls echoes today in our overconfidence in technological defenses. We build firewalls and cybersecurity systems, thinking they're impenetrable, only to be outsmarted by a teenager in their basement. It's a timeless dance between human ingenuity and hubris, a reminder that no matter how advanced our defenses, there's always a crafty mind ready to breach them. So, as we ponder the grandeur and folly of the Byzantine defensive architecture, let's take a moment to appreciate the complexities of human nature. The Byzantines, like us, were caught in a perpetual balancing act between confidence and complacency, innovation and inertia. Their walls stand as a testament to their tenacity and a cautionary tale of overconfidence, a story as old as time and as relevant as ever. And with that, we leave the Theodosian walls behind, standing tall yet vulnerable, a silent witness to centuries of triumph and tragedy. Next up, we'll delve deeper into the Byzantine Empire's architectural legacy, exploring how these mighty walls and other structures influenced the world beyond their stone confines. Stay tuned, because the Byzantine saga is far from over, and there's plenty more to uncover in the chapters that await. And so, with the Theodosian walls standing tall yet vulnerable, we pivot to explore the architectural DNA that Byzantium left in the modern world. You see, while the Byzantine Empire eventually crumbled, like a cookie left in milk too long, its architectural legacy was far more resilient. It seeped across borders, influencing everyone from the Russians, with their iconic onion domes, to Western architects crafting church layouts that scream Byzantine chic. Let's start with those Russian onion domes, the architectural equivalent of a beret-wearing hipster. It's easy to assume these domes were just a product of Russian winter fashion gone wild, but the truth is more nuanced. The onion dome design, which you can spot from Moscow to St. Petersburg, owes a nod to Byzantine ingenuity. The Russians, gazing longingly at Byzantine splendor, decided to borrow, and by borrow I mean unabashedly incorporate, this aesthetic during the 10th century. They weren't just after a pretty skyline. They wanted to symbolize the heavenly kingdom above. And who better to emulate than the Byzantines, who turned domes into celestial masterpieces? So, next time you see that quintessential Russian skyline, remember it's a testament to the Byzantine knack for style and a little cultural cross-pollination. Yet, let's not romanticize this influence into oblivion. While Byzantine architecture was indeed the muse for many a Russian structure, it's a stretch to say they invented the Russian look wholesale. The Russians adapted and evolved these ideas, giving them their unique flair, like taking a classic recipe and adding extra spice. It's a subtle reminder that cultural exchange is rarely a one-way street. It's more like a roundabout where everyone contributes something to the potluck. Now, hopping over to Western Europe, the Byzantine touch is evident in church layouts that look like someone took a Byzantine plan and said, let's add a bit of Gothic drama. The cruciform layout, popular in many Western churches, owes a debt to Byzantine blueprints. But here's the kicker. While the Byzantines were all about balance and symmetry, the Gothic architects went for the more is more approach, adding spires, gargoyles, and enough stained glass to make even the most devout minimalist weep. But was Byzantine influence as widespread as some might claim? Yes and no. While it's tempting to credit them with inventing every architectural marvel from Paris to Prague, the reality is more grounded. Byzantine architecture was undoubtedly influential, but it was one voice in a chorus of styles that shaped medieval and Renaissance Europe. They were like the trendsetters who started the fashion, but others took it and ran in their own directions, kind of like how bell-bottoms became skinny jeans over time. Economically speaking, the Byzantines were a force to be reckoned with. Their strategic position along trade routes meant that ideas like spices traveled far and wide. The Byzantine Empire was a melting pot of cultures, and its architecture reflected that diversity. But let's debunk the myth that Byzantium was the lone architectural genius of its time. The empire was more of a brilliant curator, blending influences from East and West into a unique style that resonated far beyond its borders. And what about the myth of Byzantine invincibility? Sure, their walls were formidable, and their domes defied gravity, but the empire was as susceptible to overreach as any other. Their downfall serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder that while dreaming big is admirable, ignoring the practicalities can lead to a very real wake-up call. The Byzantines learned the hard way that grandiose architecture doesn't pay the bills or fend off invaders indefinitely, a lesson as relevant today as it was in their time. So, what's the takeaway from this architectural saga? In the end, the Byzantines taught us that architecture is more than just bricks and mortar. It's a reflection of ambition, faith, and identity. It's about standing tall in the face of adversity and leaving a mark that transcends time. Their structures are a testament to human creativity, a reminder that while empires may rise and fall, the art they leave behind continues to inspire and challenge us. As we close this chapter on Byzantine architecture, let's reflect on its enduring legacy. It's a legacy that underscores the power of innovation, the allure of beauty, and the folly of hubris. The Byzantines dared to dream big, and in doing so, changed the world in ways that still echo today. And in a world where history often repeats itself, their story is a reminder of the importance of balance between ambition and humility, grandeur and practicality. So here's to the Byzantines, architects of dreams, builders of empires, and timeless storytellers through the art of stone and sky. In the grand theatre of history, where empires rise and fall like the crescendo and decrescendo of a symphony, ancient Persia plays a key role with more than a few dramatic solos. Picture an empire that stretched its arms from the bustling markets of the Indus Valley to the arid sands of Egypt, and you'll find the Achaemenid Empire. Now, this wasn't some humble kingdom content with a few acres and a goat. No, this was the whole shebang, a vast assemblage of 1 million square miles at its peak, circa 500 BCE, making it the largest empire the world had seen up to that point. The man at the helm of this grand show, Cyrus the Great, a chap whose title is as modest as a peacock at a pigeon party. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus decided he'd had enough of his family's modest holdings in what is now modern-day Iran. With a few clever battles and alliances, he carved out a new empire, piecing together lands like a kid with a particularly expansive Lego set. Cyrus wasn't just a conqueror, he was a statesman. He knew that ruling over a sprawling domain of diverse cultures required more than just a sharp sword. It demanded religious tolerance, a concept that, in some parts of the world today, still seems as elusive as a unicorn riding a rainbow. Enter Zoroastrianism, the state religion of this newly minted empire. This was no mere collection of bedtime stories. Zoroastrianism was a faith woven with cosmic narratives and moral dualities. At its heart was the battle between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of chaos and darkness. Think of it as the ultimate good versus evil showdown, long before Marvel movies made it their bread and butter. The religion stressed the importance of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, a triad that, let's be honest, would solve a lot of modern woes. Cyrus's policies were as groundbreaking as they were pragmatic. He didn't march into Babylon and demand they swap their gods like trading cards. Instead, he respected local religions and customs, effectively making him a hero in the annals of history. The Cyrus Cylinder, a baked clay artifact that has been dubbed the first declaration of human rights, chronicles his release of the Jewish people from Babylonian exile. Now, whether this was a genuine act of kindness or a savvy political move is up for debate. But hey, even if it was the latter, at least he wasn't just another tyrant with a penchant for gold-plated statues. After Cyrus, the empire found itself under the rule of Darius I, another titan of history. Darius took the reins in 522 BCE and decided it was high time for a bit of imperial housekeeping. He reorganized the empire into satrapies, essentially ancient Persia's version of regional administration, each with its own governor. This wasn't just bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. It was a way to maintain control over a realm that stretched over 500 miles from east to west. Under Darius, the empire's infrastructure flourished. He commissioned the Royal Road, a 700-mile stretch that allowed for faster communication across the empire. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of fiber-optic broadband, minus the Wi-Fi. Darius was also a big fan of documenting his achievements in stone. The Behistun inscription, carved high into a cliff face, is a trilingual narrative of his conquests and reign, and is sometimes called the Rosetta Stone of Persia. It's basically Darius saying, "Look at all I've done," in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian for anyone passing by to read. If only he had Instagram, one can only imagine the hashtags. Now, let's touch on the cultural centerpiece that is Zoroastrianism, where fire plays a role so central it could have its own dressing room. Fire was seen as a symbol of purity and the presence of Ahura Mazda himself. The fire temples, where priests tended to these eternal flames, were akin to ancient Persia's version of PowerPoint presentations. Behold the sacred flame, they might have said. And now, onto our next slide, moral righteousness. But before you romanticize this too much, remember that Zoroastrianism wasn't all sunshine and divine light. The religion also stressed the end of the world, where Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu would have their final showdown. It's a narrative that's as apocalyptic as it is compelling. It's the kind of story that, if told today, would likely involve CGI explosions and a star-studded cast. The policies of Cyrus and Darius, rooted in a mix of tolerance and strategic governance, allowed Zoroastrianism to flourish as the state religion, shaping the cultural and spiritual life of the empire. It was a system that worked, at least until Alexander the Great decided he wanted Persia for himself. But that's a tale for another time. For now, let's marvel at the audacity of an empire built not just on the might of its armies, but on the strength of its ideas. An empire where the flicker of a flame was both a religious symbol and a reminder of the power of belief. The Achaemenid Empire, underpinned by the tenets of Zoroastrianism and guided by the shrewdness of its rulers, was a testament to the power of vision and the complexity of history. As the flames of Zoroastrianism flickered across the Achaemenid Empire, they lit not just the night, but the daily lives of its people, and boy, was there a lot to illuminate. You see, ancient Persian religious practices were as intricate as a Baroque symphony, but with a touch more incense and a lot more fire. Let's dive into the daily grind of religious life, where the sacred and the mundane intertwined like a double helix of divine bureaucracy. First up, the fire temples. These were not your average places of worship, where you'd pop in for a quick prayer and a potluck. No, these temples were the beating heart of Zoroastrian faith, where eternal flames burned like the ancient world's version of an all-night diner's neon sign. They were meticulously maintained by the Magi, the priestly class who, let's face it, were the original gatekeepers of divine knowledge and spiritual clout. Forget about modern influencers hawking detox teas. The Magi wielded real influence, shaping not just religious but political landscapes. Speaking of the Magi, let's give them their due. These guys were the spiritual rock stars of their time, and not just because they wore cool hats. Their role extended beyond the temple walls and into the very fabric of society, acting as advisors to kings, interpreters of dreams, and even early scientists in their own right, were the ones ensuring that the sacred fires never went out, performing rituals that might make modern-day health and safety officers break out in hives. And they didn't do it for free. Oh no, the temple economy was a robust system that would make any modern economist raise an eyebrow. You see, the temples were akin to financial institutions. They owned land, collected offerings, and sometimes even lent money. The Magi were the ancient equivalent of investment bankers, only instead of stocks, they dealt in divine favor. Worshippers would bring offerings, anything from livestock to precious metals, hoping to curry favor with Ahura Mazda, or perhaps just to get a little divine insurance against life's many uncertainties. This was a time when religion and economy were as intertwined as a politician and a good photo op. Now, let's talk rituals. These weren't just simple prayers or chants. They were elaborate productions that could rival the most complex of modern-day bureaucratic procedures. Imagine trying to organize a wedding, a corporate merger, and a rock concert all at once. That's the level of complexity we're talking about. There were specific times, specific chants, and specific offerings required, all meticulously planned and executed. If you think filling out your tax return is a headache, try keeping track of which deity prefers what type of incense, and at precisely what time it should be burned. The rituals, though, played a crucial role in maintaining societal order, ensuring that the cosmic balance was kept, and that the forces of chaos didn't overrun the world. It's the kind of cosmic responsibility that makes even the most arduous of modern-day tasks seem like a walk in the park. The ancient Persians believed that their actions directly influenced the cosmic order, a sentiment that might seem quaint today but was deadly serious back then. Now, you might be wondering about the logistics of all this. How did they fund these elaborate rituals? Well, remember those temple economies. They were well-oiled machines. The offerings collected were used to fund temple activities, pay the Magi, and support the community. In many ways, the temples functioned as centers of social welfare, providing for the needy and ensuring the community's well-being. So, the next time you swipe your credit card, take a moment to appreciate the ancient Persians who were doing their own version of economic alchemy, long before the advent of digital currency. And while we're on the topic of money, let's not forget the spice of politics. The Magi weren't just religious figures, they were political players. They had the ears of kings and the support of the populace, making them powerful figures in their own right. Their influence was such that they could make or break a ruler's reign, acting as both kingmakers and kingbreakers. It was a delicate dance of power, where piety and politics were inextricably linked, a far cry from the modern-day separation of church and state. But let's not romanticize it too much. The system wasn't without its flaws. The Magi could be as corrupt as any modern-day politician, using their influence for personal gain rather than the greater good. And while the fire temples were centers of worship and community, they were also bastions of control, ensuring that the populace adhered to the state religion and its dictates. It was a balancing act between power and piety, with the scales often tipping in favor of those who held the flame. As we wrap up this chapter, remember that the ancient Persian religious practices were more than just rituals and rites. They were a reflection of a society striving to find order in chaos, much like we do today. From fire temples to the Magi's intricate web of influence, these practices shaped the empire in ways that continue to echo through history. So, next time you light a candle or say a prayer, spare a thought for the ancient Persians who, with their flickering flames and cosmic chants, laid the groundwork for the spiritual and political landscapes we navigate today. But hold on tight, because the story of ancient Persia is far from over. There are more layers to uncover and myths to debunk in the coming chapters. As we peel back the layers of ancient Persian religious practices, we're about to embark on a journey that spans continents and cultures, like an ancient version of a world tour without the overpriced merchandise. The Achaemenid Empire, in all its sprawling glory, wasn't just a political powerhouse. It was a cultural chameleon, absorbing and adapting the customs of its conquered territories. Picture a massive melting pot where Persian religious practices mingled with the beliefs of Egypt, Greece, and beyond, creating a cultural cocktail that was as complex as it was intoxicating. Now, let's debunk the myth of Persian tolerance, a concept as romanticized as a candlelit dinner on a budget airline. The truth is, while the Persians were indeed more lenient than some of their contemporaries, looking at you, Assyrians, their tolerance was often more strategic than sincere. It was less about embracing diversity for diversity's sake and more about a pragmatic, live, and let live as long as you pay your taxes, approach. The empire was a vast machine, and the gears needed to be well-oiled with the currency of compliance and coin. Consider Egypt, a land with a pantheon as crowded as a modern-day Comic-Con. When the Persians rolled into town, they didn't have the audacity to suggest that the Egyptians abandoned their gods in favor of Ahura Mazda. Instead, they allowed the local cults to continue their practices, provided they didn't interfere with the Persian agenda. It was a clever move, ensuring that the locals remained placated and the tax coffers full. But let's not kid ourselves. This wasn't some utopian vision of a multicultural paradise. The Persians were practical rulers, and their version of religious tolerance was more about maintaining order than fostering understanding. The Greeks, ever the drama enthusiasts, had their own encounters with Persian religious practices. When the Persians attempted to extend their influence into Greek territories, they didn't demand the abandonment of Zeus or Athena. Instead, they allowed the Greeks their divine soap operas, as long as they didn't forget who was really in charge. This led to an exchange of ideas, with Zoroastrian concepts subtly seeping into Greek philosophy. It was a cultural dialogue that could rival any modern-day fusion restaurant, with a little less avocado and a touch more fire worship. But here's where it gets juicy. The influence wasn't a one-way street. Persian religion was both a unifying force and a point of contention. As the empire expanded, so too did the need to establish a cohesive identity. Zoroastrianism was a tool of unification, bringing a sense of cosmic order to a diverse populace. Yet it also became a source of friction, particularly in regions where local customs clashed with the monotheistic tendencies of Zoroastrianism. It was a delicate balance, one that required as much finesse as it did force. The Persian approach to religious integration was nothing if not pragmatic. They understood that outright suppression would lead to rebellion faster than you could say insurrection. Instead, they employed a strategy of accommodation, allowing local traditions to persist while subtly embedding Zoroastrian elements. This wasn't just religious diplomacy. It was the art of empire building, where every god and goddess had a role to play in the grand narrative of Persian hegemony. Let's not forget the economic angle, because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that nothing moves people quite like money. The Persians were master tax collectors, and their religious policies were as much about filling the treasury as they were about divine favor. By allowing local religions to operate, Persians ensured a steady stream of revenue from temple offerings and religious festivals. It was an economic strategy wrapped in the guise of tolerance, a cunning move that kept the empire's coffers as full as a Persian banquet table. As we navigate this tapestry of cultural exchange, it's essential to recognize the dual role of Persian religion as both a bridge and a barrier. It connected disparate cultures, allowing for a flow of ideas and beliefs that enriched the empire. Yet, it also served as a line in the sand, delineating the boundaries of Persian influence and control. This duality is what made the Achaemenid Empire so enduring, and why its legacy continues to intrigue historians to this day. The Persians, with their pragmatic approach to governance, understood that religion could be both a tool and a weapon. It was a means of unifying their subjects under a common banner, while also keeping potential dissent at bay. This strategy, while effective in the short term, was not without its challenges. As the empire grew, so too did the complexity of maintaining this delicate balance. It was a high-wire act that required constant vigilance and adaptation, a testament to the shrewdness of Persian rulers. In the end, the story of Persian religious practices is one of complexity and contradiction. It is a tale of tolerance that was as much about control as it was about compassion. While the empire may have allowed its subjects to worship as they pleased, it was always under the watchful eye of Persian authority. This was not a land of religious freedom in the modern sense, but rather a carefully managed ecosystem where every belief had its place and purpose. As we bring this chapter to a close, remember that the story of Persian religious influence is far from over. The empire's legacy continues to resonate, a reminder of a time when faith and power were inextricably linked. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the annals of ancient Persia, where the past is as vibrant and volatile as the flames that once burned in its temples. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more history to explore, so keep those curiosity flames burning bright. So, as we journey from the grandeur of the Achaemenid Empire to its eventual fall, let's dive into how Zoroastrianism's flames flickered on through time, even when Alexander the Great, history's notorious overachiever, came knocking. Picture Alexander in 330 BCE, fresh from the glory of defeating Darius Roman III at the Battle of Gaugamela, sauntering into Persia like a party crasher with a penchant for cultural souvenirs. But did he treat Zoroastrianism like just another knick-knack for his imperial mantelpiece? Not exactly. For starters, Alexander wasn't some bumbling conqueror who torched everything in sight. Sure, he torched Persepolis in a drunken spree, a move that screams, "Oops, I did it again." But he had a more nuanced approach to Zoroastrianism. You see, Alexander was as strategic as he was ambitious. He recognized that maintaining order in the newly conquered Persian territories required more than just military might. It required a bit of cultural finesse. Unlike the Persians, whose religious tolerance was as flexible as a yoga instructor, Alexander knew he had to play nice with the Zoroastrian priestly class, the Magi. These guys were still the gatekeepers of local influence and the custodians of the sacred flame. Rather than extinguishing Zoroastrianism, Alexander allowed it to persist, albeit under the watchful eye of Greek administration. It was a political maneuver, ensuring that the locals didn't revolt, while he went on to name more places after himself than a narcissistic mapmaker. But let's not be too rosy-eyed about Alexander's intentions. While he allowed Zoroastrian practices to continue, he also introduced Hellenistic elements into the mix, subtly reshaping the religious landscape. Picture a cultural smoothie where Greek philosophy and Persian spirituality blended, sometimes smoothly, sometimes like oil and water in a blender without a lid. Fast forward a few centuries, and we find ourselves knee-deep in the era of the Parthians, those enigmatic horse-riding masters who took over after Alexander's empire splintered faster than a Hollywood marriage. The Parthians, ruling from 247 BCE to 224 CE, took a laissez-faire approach to religion, treating Zoroastrianism with a gentle hand, more like a vintage car they didn't want to scratch than a religious relic to be revered. They allowed the fire temples to flicker on, but with less state support than the Achaemenids had provided. Under Parthian rule, Zoroastrianism became somewhat decentralized, allowing local variations to flourish. It was a bit like letting your favorite indie band evolve without the constraints of a major label. Now, let's not forget the economic angle, because if there's one thing that keeps history interesting, it's the almighty currency. The Parthian rulers understood that temples weren't just places for spiritual solace. They were economic powerhouses. The fire temples continued to serve as community centers, managing land and resources, and they became integral parts of local economies. So, while the Parthians were busy trading along the Silk Road, the Magi were ensuring the religious coffers stayed filled, a symbiotic relationship that kept the empire humming along. Enter the Sasanians, the empire that took over from the Parthians in 224 CE, bringing with them a more centralized approach to Zoroastrianism that would make any modern-day bureaucrat proud. The first Sasanian king, Ardashir I, was a Zoroastrian zealot who sought to revive the religion to its former glory. He re-established Zoroastrianism as the state religion, giving it the kind of royal endorsement usually reserved for limited edition sneakers. Under the Sasanians, Zoroastrianism was revitalized with a zeal that bordered on fanaticism. The Magi regained their status as the religious elite, and the fire temples once again became the throbbing heart of Persian spirituality. Ardashir even commissioned the compilation of the Avesta, the sacred Zoroastrian texts, ensuring that the teachings of Zoroaster were preserved for posterity. Think of it as ancient Persia's version of a blockbuster re-release. But the Sasanians weren't just about religious revival, they were about religious control. They established a hierarchical church structure, complete with a Mobdi Mobedan, or chief priest, who wielded influence akin to a religious CEO. This top-down approach ensured that Zoroastrianism was uniform across the empire, a stark contrast to the more relaxed Parthian era. It was religious centralization at its finest, controlling not just the spiritual, but also the political narrative. Yet, the Sasanians' efforts weren't just about keeping the faith alive. They were also about keeping the empire intact. By tying the state closely with Zoroastrianism, the Sasanians created a cultural identity that unified the diverse peoples of their empire. It was a clever move, one that ensured loyalty not just to the crown, but to the divine order itself, a cosmic insurance policy against rebellion. As we look at Zoroastrianism's journey across these empires, it's clear that its survival wasn't just about spiritual tenacity. It was about adaptability. Whether under the Greeks, the Parthians, or the Sasanians, Zoroastrianism managed to navigate the shifting sands of politics and power, evolving without losing its fiery core. It's a testament to the resilience of belief, a reminder that faith can endure even the most turbulent of times. But before you start picturing Zoroastrianism as an unyielding monolith, remember that this was a religion that had to constantly reinvent itself to stay relevant. It was a balancing act, juggling tradition with innovation in a world where political climates changed faster than you could say, dynastic upheaval. And while Zoroastrianism may not have the global presence it once did, its legacy is woven into the tapestry of history, influencing religious thought and practice in ways both subtle and profound. So, as we close this chapter, keep in mind that the story of Zoroastrianism is far from over. Its influence continued to ripple through time, affecting empires and shaping the spiritual landscape in ways that are still felt today. And as we prepare to explore the next phase of its journey, let's remember that the flames of Zoroastrianism, though sometimes dimmed, have never truly been extinguished. They flicker on, a beacon of resilience and adaptation in the ever-changing saga of human history. Stay tuned, because there's more to this tale of fire and faith than meets the eye. As Zoroastrianism's flames flickered on through the ages, it's easy to assume they might have eventually burned out, swallowed by the sands of time and the rise of other religions. But hold onto your fire extinguishers, folks, because Zoroastrianism wasn't about to go quietly. Fast forward to today, and you'll find that this ancient faith is still very much alive, albeit with a membership that's more exclusive than a VIP club. We're talking about a global Zoroastrian population estimated at around 120,000 to 190,000. Sure, it's not exactly a crowd to fill Wembley Stadium, but it's a testament to the faith's resilience and adaptability. Now, if you're wondering why this ancient religion, born in the Achaemenid Empire and nursed through the eras of Alexander, the Parthians, and the Sasanians, remains relevant, it's time to delve into its greatest hits. Zoroastrianism, with its cosmic clash between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, didn't just light up ancient Persia. It left its mark on several of the world's biggest religions. Take Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, for example. Each found elements of Zoroastrian dualism too intriguing to ignore. Concepts like heaven and hell, angels and demons, and the apocalypse all bear the fingerprints of Zoroastrian influence, intertwined in the theological DNA of these major faiths. But let's not get starry-eyed about the cross-pollination of religious ideas. The reality is, Zoroastrianism's influence wasn't always a result of harmonious cultural exchange. Often, it was more like a theological tug-of-war, with ideas being adapted, and occasionally completely reimagined. It's a bit like the ancient version of remix culture, where the original tune gets a fresh beat, and suddenly everyone's dancing to a slightly different rhythm. Economically, the Zoroastrian community also played a pivotal role in history, particularly in the Indian subcontinent. Enter the Parsis, the Zoroastrians who, fleeing Islamic conquest in Persia around the 8th century CE, found refuge in India. There, they didn't just survive, they thrived. By the 19th century, the Parsis had become a significant commercial force in India, with names like Tara and Godrej becoming synonymous with industrial success. The Parsis embraced a philosophy of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, which translated into a knack for business that would make even modern moguls envious. However, let's not sugarcoat it. The road for Zoroastrians hasn't been all incense and prosperity. They've faced challenges, from dwindling numbers due to low birth rates and intermarriage restrictions to navigating identity in a rapidly globalizing world. It's a complex dance of adherence to tradition while tipping a hat to modernity, a balancing act as precarious as a tightrope walker with a penchant for pyrotechnics. Yet, the quirks and contradictions of ancient Persian religion are precisely what make it so enduring. Zoroastrianism's emphasis on the individual's role in cosmic order, a belief that your actions matter in the grand scheme of things, resonates today in ways that are both profound and personal. It's a philosophy that encourages a kind of cosmic accountability, a moral compass guiding its adherents through the chaos of modern life. And let's not forget the sheer audacity of ancient Persian culture itself. This was an empire that dared to blend cultures and ideas, creating a tapestry as rich and vibrant as the Persian rugs that have graced homes for centuries. Its legacy is a reminder that history isn't just a series of events, but a complex narrative woven with ambition, innovation, and yes, a fair share of contradictions. In reflecting on the enduring appeal of ancient Persian culture and religion, it's clear that their story is one of resilience and reinvention. The Achaemenid Empire may have crumbled, the Sasanians faded into history, yet the ideas born in ancient Persia continue to echo through time. Zoroastrianism, with its flickering flames and cosmic narratives, offers a lens through which we can view the complexities of human nature and the unyielding quest for meaning. So, whether you're a history buff, a seeker of spiritual wisdom, or just someone with a curiosity about the past, remember that Zoroastrianism's legacy is more than just a footnote in the annals of history. It's a reminder that the past is always present, shaping our beliefs, influencing our cultures, and reminding us that even in the face of change, some flames never truly go out. As we close this chapter, let's keep those fires of curiosity burning bright, for the story of ancient Persia and its religious practices is far from over, and there's always more history waiting to be uncovered.